Chapter 1388. Yun Nuoxing's awkward greeting was ignored. After staring at each other for a while, Yun Nuoxing pounced on Siyu like a tiger hunting for its prey. He raised his right hand and was about to hit Siyu. Siyu trembled and squatted down with her hands on her head. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have sneaked out." Yun Nuoxing was stunned. His hand froze. He was a little stunned. He hadn't said anything yet and the girl had already admitted her mistake? "But, I'm also worried about you," Siyu muttered as she raised her head. Her limpid eyes sparkled as she looked up at him from below and said pitifully, "Yun Nuoxing, and you told me to follow you. Didn't I follow you here?" Siyu saw that he was stunned. She stood up and said with a smile, "Yun Nua Planet's death language. Indeed, what he said at the beginning was not wrong at all, and what the little girl said was not wrong at all. It was just that," he thought for a moment, and his hand that was frozen in midair still violently knocked Siyu's head. The perfect amount of strength made her cry out in pain. Although this little girl did not seem to have done anything, he still needed to knock her a little. There was no other reason. After getting to know him, this girl had become more and more mischievous. This time, she dared to cross the void and chase after him here. "I've explained it clearly. Why did you still hit me?" Siyu held her head and stared at him with a gloomy face. Naughty children need to be taught a lesson regularly. Otherwise, they will become troublemakers in a few days. Yun Nuoxing grinned. His words made Siyu's face turn red. She couldn't say anything for a long time. If she refuted, she would admit that she was a naughty child. If she didn't refute, she would feel that she was hit in vain. After a while, she suddenly reached out and pinched his waist lightly. The observer was so shocked that he almost jumped off the Overlord Island. He quickly hid behind Feng Qinghuang. "Did anything happen in the past few days?" Glancing at the embarrassed girl, Yun Nuoxing rubbed his waist helplessly. He looked at the other girl who had an innocent face and asked. Feng Qinghuang shook her head and told him everything that happened in the past few days. They didn't encounter any danger on the way here. Other than a small commotion before they entered the island, nothing else happened. Yun Nuoxing was relieved. The situation was similar to what he and Jing Yuanji had guessed. Feng Qinghuang was tricked by Siyu and mixed in with Yi's team. He was just worried that the two girls would encounter any danger. Little Monkey squatted at the side and wagged his tail. He looked at Yun Nuoxing with a pair of red eyes. From the conversation just now, he could tell that the person in front of him was the Lord and Little Star that they were talking about. However, he was a little different from the 7-feet-tall man that he imagined. He stared blankly for a while. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the sky. A piece of cloud was suddenly cracked by something. A pure silver giant metal bird poked out from behind the cloud and approached them. It was the spaceship that had just left. "Hey, why did that silver giant bird come back?" Siyu pointed to the sky curiously. Everyone turned their gazes and saw that the silver metal bird had stopped in midair. With their eyesight, they could see that there was someone looking down at them from the edge of the ship with a serious expression on his face. In just a few days, 2 fragments landed on the same island and in the same place. If this news gets out, it will attract the attention of humans. Moreover, your people made too much noise when they landed. Little Monkey glanced at her and said in an indifferent tone. That voice was actually a crisp and tender male voice. Yes, the voice of a boy. "Ah, Mr. Tyrant Emperor, you can talk?" Siyu giggled and picked up Little Monkey. She curiously looked at the pair of helpless red eyes. Yun Nuoxing looked curiously at the silver giant bird in the sky. A spaceship full of celestial beings. That was his only impression. Dao Heaven looked at the spaceship and said, "I can't see where the energy is concentrated. The specifications are also completely different. Where is the core? Isn't it driven by that kind of energy? Why is there a need for a spaceship of this level on a planet?" "Little Star, who is this woman who keeps talking to herself?" Siyu moved to Yun Nuoxing's side and asked Dao Heaven softly. I brought her out from the world we just left. She might have some other reaction or use. Let's observe her for now. Yun Nuoxing also lowered her voice and said. Although the two of them were whispering in each other's ears, Dao Heaven still heard them. She wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction. Big brother, don't make me sound like a lab rat. Although I agreed to cooperate with you guys, I definitely didn't do it willingly, you know? Yun Nuoxing looked at her with an awkward expression and said, Where did you learn to speak in such a weird tone? I used it 1,500 years ago. Later, I realized that it wasn't very suitable, so I stopped using it. Little monkey didn't pay attention to their conversation. He kept looking at the silver giant bird in the sky. He felt uncomfortable with it staying there for so long. Just as he was about to run to the mountain to intimidate it, there was a sudden tremor. Everyone present was stunned. Furthermore, he clearly saw that even the white ship in the sky was shaking. Even the energy barrier was rippling. This was definitely not the floating island shaking, but the entire space shaking. Dao Heaven was shocked. He quickly moved to Yun Nuoxing and grabbed his clothes. Ugh, I'm still a little sensitive to tremors. What's happening in this world? Yun Nuoxing lowered his head and looked at the two girls behind him. He reached out to hold Feng Qinghuang and rolled his eyes helplessly. This world didn't seem to have any traces of distorted energy. And this was something he didn't know. He had only been here for less than 10 minutes. Who knew if the floating island in this world had the ability to cause earthquakes? However, even though he didn't know what was happening, the people in the sky seemed to know. Or rather, they had some guesses. Judging from their panicked yet orderly appearance, he could tell that they were looking at something on his right. He also turned around curiously and was stunned. In the sky far away from the hegemon Emperor Island, there were countless giant beasts flapping their wings. There were beasts that looked like dragons, beasts that looked like giant birds, and in short, there were all kinds of magical beasts flying in the sky. All of them had wings. They were chirping anxiously to accompany the sudden tremors. They were flying wildly in the direction of the hegemon Emperor Island. At a glance, there was a black mass of beasts. It looked like a riot. Bang! All of a sudden, the hegemon Emperor Island trembled even more violently. The tremors this time were different from the tremors in space. Fourth, there were tens of thousands of horses galloping on the ground. Little Monkey and Yun Nuoxing were the first to see where the tremors came from. Both of them were stunned. On the islands far away from the hegemon Emperor Island, there were suddenly tens of thousands of beasts galloping. They used their own strength to jump twice or thrice in the air. Some of them even directly leaped across the distance of thousands of feet and landed heavily on the hegemon Emperor Island. The entire island was trembling due to the movements of the gigantic beasts. Hegemon Emperor Island was not the only island that was affected. Other islands that were similar to the hegemon Emperor Island were also trampled by the crazy beasts on other islands. Those that could fly flew across the sky, and those that could only run and jump directly across. No matter what they did, it looked like they were running for their lives, as if they had encountered something terrible. Suddenly, a huge shadow appeared in the sky. Yun Nuo planet raised their heads in unison. It was a demon that looked like a flood dragon, but it was definitely not a demon beast that they knew. It was thousands of miles long. When the little monkey saw it, it quickly broke free from Siyu's arms. It took 2 or 3 steps in the sky to catch up with the flood dragon. The latter also stopped its huge body that was crushing through space. The two seemed to be talking. I don't know what exactly happened, but something bad must have happened. When Yun Nuoxing said that, his face was full of an unknown expression. He looked depressed, unhappy, and a little angry. Why did something big happen when he had just arrived? He heard from Feng Qinghuang and the others that they had been safe and sound for the past few days. Wasn't it another proof that he was a troublemaker? On top of the Iron Bird, an Yuan was urgently issuing orders one after another. The blindfolded youth beside him was helping to control the trembling bird. The two of them looked at each other and saw the panic in each other's eyes. This was the first time they had seen such a scene. The horde of beasts seemed to have gone mad as they crazily rushed towards the main island. However, they didn't see anything behind the horde of beasts. It was as if there was some kind of invisible force that made the horde of beasts feel a great sense of crisis. They had no choice but to leave the island where they had lived their whole lives and move towards other safe places. The deafening sound of air exploding could be heard, along with the terrified cries of many flying magical beasts. Thankfully, those magical beasts still knew to avoid them even when they were in a panic. None of them crashed into the iron-silver bird and brought them down to the island below. Calm down. Convert all the unimportant energy into defensive power and mobility to protect the scholars in the residential area. Don't rush to set off. Wait until the demonic beasts are quieter and there are fewer of them before we rush back to the spirit-gathering continent. If we rush forward rashly, we will be smashed into hundreds of thousands of pieces by the demonic beasts and scattered evenly in the chaos abyss. After an Yuan roared, a golden rune appeared between his hands. He pressed it on the energy barrier of the iron bird. The trembling of the space suddenly weakened a lot as the barrier absorbed it. Only then did an Yuan have the time to look into the distance. The clear sky was now covered by dark clouds. A large black shadow was coming towards them. It was not a dark cloud, but a group of demonic beasts. Their size ranged from thousands of feet to tens of thousands of miles wide. However, at this moment, regardless of the size or strength of the demonic beasts, all of them were fleeing like frightened small beasts. They were in the center of this dark cloud, and Yuan could not help but smile bitterly. They were waiting for the demonic beasts to calm down, but who knew how many demonic beasts lived on these hundreds of thousands of islands, even if it was just the outer islands where they were. The attack had been going on for at least 20 minutes, but the dark clouds had not stopped. More demonic beasts from further away kept passing by the iron bird. The vibrations they caused the people on the ship to feel a layer of haze in their hearts. The bigger the commotion, the worse the situation would be. Buddy, I just contacted the spirit-gathering continent. Over there, the side closer to the inner circle did not seem to have such a commotion. It seems that there is a problem in the outer circle. Not only here, other places such as Spirit Master Island, Clear Immortal Island, Flying Cloud Island, and some other places have observed a large-scale demonic beast rampage in the outer circle. The blindfolded youth ran over from the residential area and said urgently, "What's the situation in the chaos abyss now?" The blindfolded youth hesitated. He looked at the demonic beasts around them and said in a low voice, "It's calm, huh?" And Yuan was stunned. The people around him were also stunned. From the beginning of their memories and their own experiences, the only thing that could bring such an exaggerated degree of chaos to this world could only be a disturbance in the chaos abyss. That meant that something in the chaos abyss was about to emerge. Only such a situation could cause the entire world to become chaotic. However, at this moment, the chaos abyss was calm? Could it be that there was some unknown madness in this world that had not been discovered? Boom! A violent roar suddenly came from the sky far away. On the island far away that was already empty, a huge magma pillar suddenly shot up into the sky and turned into a fiery rain that fell on that island. In an instant, that island was engulfed in flames and fell on the surrounding islands and the chaos abyss. A large cloud of hot smoke rushed into the sky. As the smoke pillar appeared, the island that had just erupted in flames was suddenly pinched by a huge hand. Huge cracks began to appear on the ground from the outer circle to the inner circle, and from the inner circle to the outer circle. Then, the body of the island exploded. The debris that fell from the island turned into meteorites that fell from the island like a meteor shower. The same scene didn't just happen on that island. All the islands in the outer circle turned into huge fireballs that spewed out meteors. Some of the islands in the outer circle that were high up in the air even affected the islands in the middle circle. Countless archipelagos burned fiercely. Buddy, we can't wait any longer. If we don't leave now, we will be affected by the fiery rain sooner or later. The blindfolded young man urged, and Yuan was shocked. Looking at the beasts that were still crazily rushing past him, he gritted his teeth and waved his hand. Let's go to the main continent. The blindfolded young man had been waiting for this moment. With a slap on the ship's hull, the iron bird that had already turned around immediately emitted a huge energy reaction, startling the herd of beasts that were rushing over from afar. They subconsciously distanced themselves from the ship. When the iron bird was about to fly away, and Yuanshi subconsciously turned around to look at the building on Tyrant Emperor Island. He thought he saw a human figure earlier, but now he couldn't see anything. Even the building had disappeared. It was as if nothing had ever existed. It was as if everything that once existed had been destroyed in this inexplicable chaos. When the riot appeared, Yun Nuoshing and the others had just stabilized themselves. Before they could think of what to do, the chaos hit them in the face. After that, the little monkey that seemed to be very familiar with Cu and the others suddenly ended their conversation with the dragon-like creature. Without saying a word, the little monkey dragged them onto the dragon-like creature that was tens of thousands of miles long. The little monkey took away the building while it was at it, and then flew towards the main continent with the beasts in a daze. Lord Feng. The few people who stayed in the palace to protect the two girls greeted Yun Nuoshing excitedly when they saw him. After that, they quickly said, Lord I Ching and Lord Qing are currently gathering information in other places. They said that there is a similar movement in other places. It seems that there is a similar riot in the peripheral islands of the entire world. It seems that there is a movement in the Chaos Abyss, but there are no obvious signs yet. Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly. He didn't know what the Chaos Abyss was, nor did he know what was going on at this moment. He only knew that he had just landed on Tyrant Emperor Island 20 minutes ago, and 20 minutes later, he was taken away in a daze. However, there were some things that he could still see with his eyesight and perception. In short, something big had happened in this world, and it might even be a catastrophe. So the question was, did it have anything to do with him? Based on his experience over the years and his talent for causing trouble wherever he went, it seemed that it had something to do with him. Boom. At this moment, the huge explosion caused everyone to turn around and look behind them. The sky in the distance was illuminated by the flames and turned into a fiery red color. The fragments of the archipelago fell from the sky like a meteor shower, turning the islands into huge fireballs. The sudden scene caused Cu and the other girls' faces to turn slightly pale. Yun Nuoshing roughly sized up the scene, and his expression changed slightly. The impact of the explosion had sent the debris far away from Tyrant Emperor Island. At this moment, they were already quite a distance away from Tyrant Emperor Island, but they were still within the range of the explosion. Of course, they were not afraid of this level of turbulence, but these demons could not take it. They probably felt that something was wrong in advance, so they all fled from the periphery. In this situation, the only place that could survive was. He looked straight ahead. There was only the ridiculously huge main continent in front of him, which was even bigger than the celestial realm. Cu noticed that he was looking ahead and followed his gaze. It is said that the spirit-gathering continent is even bigger than the celestial realm. I thought that the size of the celestial realm was already exaggerated enough. Yun Nuoshing glanced at the situation in this world and nodded in understanding. The celestial realm only exists in a world of light, which is just a huge continent. However, this world, this main continent, and the countless islands here are all that exists in this world. There are only these in this world of light, and there are no star regions or stars. However, he hadn't yet reacted to what had happened. He had just exchanged a few words with Yi Qing and Qing Jun, but they seemed to be still busy. They only said 2 or 3 words before hurriedly ending it. They agreed to meet on the main continent at that time to talk about the problems of this world in detail. Oh right, he also took the time to take a look at the composition of life in this world. 40% of it was the human race and various humanoid branch races. The remaining 60% were all demons, and the 2 races lived in harmony. When he saw this, he only felt that his brain was about to stop working. In any world, he had never seen magical beasts and humans living together so harmoniously. He had seen many fierce battles in the void. But like this, it was not an exaggeration to say that this was the first time he had seen something like this. When he shared this information with the others, they fell silent and pondered. Only Tao Heaven suddenly said, "Is there a huge threat in this world that forced the demons and humans to live in harmony? If not for the fact that he was a person living in an extremely chaotic world, he would not have thought of this so quickly. Then, the threat, well, there was no need to say it. In this world that existed in the void, there was a huge threat inside. Other than the distorted clan, what else could it be?" Chapter 1389. Yun Nuoshing and the others had just arrived in this world not long ago, and their knowledge of this world was infinitely close to zero. It was only because they were aware of the mess in the void that they were aware of the major event that could be hidden behind it. Still, that major event was no different from the chaotic period they just went through. Who knew when it would happen, which was why he could not explain what was happening before them. At present, he could only follow the dark tide towards the main continent known as the Spirit-Gathering Continent. He was not worried about encountering anything since there was nothing in the void that could pose a threat. Except for that distorted race, sacrificing the power of their entire race to drag him down would not be a problem. Either way, he was sitting on the back of the dragon-like worm and darting into the distance. The little monkey that appeared to be very familiar with the worm was beside him, its red eyes flashing with doubt and a little fear. It could not help turning back to watch as the flames engulfed the border between the middle circle and the outer circle of the archipelago. It watched as the islands crumbled into fragments and were flung away without stopping, and there was no telling if the middle circle of archipelago would be wiped out as well. Along the way, many of the beasts around them had turned around to look. When they saw the island they were resting on crumbling, their faces were instantly filled with panic and fear. If they had run any slower, they would have been buried in the sky together with the island. After a short period of fear and trepidation, all of the beasts let go of their feelings of longing and regret and quickly flew in the direction of the main continent. Yun Nuoshing kept looking behind him, and at the end, he simply turned around and sat down. His eyes glowed with silver light as he stared at the islands that had collectively self-destructed, trying to see something, such as what kind of energy had induced such a thing to happen, or if there was something that was not easy to discover causing destruction. Unfortunately, he did not see anything. Those islands were like world lights that had reached the end of their lifespan, and when their time was up, they inexplicably fell into self-destruction. Some of the destruction was so intense that it even affected the world lights around them. He did not see anything hidden that destroyed the archipelago, but he did see the silver iron bird that soared over the horizon with the beasts, and stared at the ship in interest. The iron bird that had been flying smoothly was now experiencing a little mishap. The radiance of the runes over its body dimmed slightly, and even the surging energy in its core diminished considerably. The ship was not a battleship with combat capabilities, but a large passenger ship that looked larger and more comfortable. Although it had certain defensive capabilities that could withstand the energy bursting out from the chaotic abyss, the situation just now was an exception. It was the first time the ship had experienced spatial tremors, and the tremors had not completely stopped even now. When the tremors first came, it had disrupted the energy output of the energy core, which caused part of the ship's functions to stop. The shape of its spread wings could not be changed as well, and an yuanshi had to cut off a third of its wings so that the bird could continue flying, under the influence of internal factors. Bang! My lord, the energy of the chaotic abyss wafts between heaven and earth, but its manifestation is completely different from what we have detected before. It's weird. A crew member who was controlling the ship reported loudly to an yuanshi. Before he reported, there was a small energy explosion that damaged the bird's wings. It could have been because he forced the bird to keep flying, or because the energy core was still in chaos and could not smoothly send the energy to where it wanted to go. And yuanshi took out an hourglass-shaped energy crystal and put it in front of his eyes as if he was looking at a pair of glasses. "Buddy, come and take a look." The blindfolded youth subconsciously took the crystal glasses and put it on the blindfold. He looked at the sky through the blindfold and the crystal and could not help but be stunned. There were traces of red energy in the sky, and there was a trace of deep darkness in the red. It was indeed the energy of the chaotic abyss. At first glance, he thought that the chaotic abyss could not bear the 7,000 years of loneliness and finally came out to cause trouble. However, upon closer inspection, the energy was very strange. It wafted between heaven and earth, drifting left and right, and finally colliding with each other, turning into colorless energy and dissipating. It was as if it had self-destructed. What's going on? The blindfolded young man was stunned. There wasn't a lot of energy, but its appearance here was enough to disrupt the existing order in this area. There were so many life forms here, and as long as a small disturbance appeared, half of them would self-destruct. However, the chaotic energy that was drifting all over the world was annihilated after circling around twice to show its existence. This was simply unprecedented. Oh no, their emergence was still somewhat useful. There was another small energy explosion on the iron bird just now, and the aftershock of the explosion was mixed with the aura of chaotic energy. It seemed that the chaotic energy had not only come out to act cute, but also to cause trouble for them. The iron bird, which was already on the verge of collapse, was now in a worse situation. It was on the verge of collapse, and the connecting parts of the structure were creaking loudly, as if the bird would break its wings and fall from the sky at any time. "Sir, the chaotic energy has invaded." However, they quickly retreated and took away 2/3 of our core's energy. The person who had just reported loudly to an yuanshi and the blindfolded youth. And yuanshi gritted his teeth. According to the current situation, before the iron bird could return to the main continent, it would experience 4 more spatial aftershocks or 2 more explosions of chaotic energy, and it would be done for. Bang! That's the 3rd time now. And yuanshi took a deep breath and used his own energy to forcefully stabilize the turbulence, raising an energy barrier to isolate the spatial tremors. However, a simple energy barrier was not very good at isolating the spatial tremors. The barrier of laws that he had raised at the beginning could no longer be used due to the damage to the core. As for letting them use it, and yuanshi laughed bitterly. It was just a thought. What's that ship doing? Yun Nuashing couldn't help but frown. A bunch of heavenly gods. Don't they know how to raise a barrier of laws to resist the spatial tremors? The beasts here all knew how to use a barrier of laws. The weaker beasts who didn't know how to use it hid within the domain of the stronger beast. However, that iron bird had already been forced to slow down twice since he had first seen it. The distance between them was getting further and further. He thought that it was very sturdy, but he didn't expect it to be so useless. At this moment, the other beasts all noticed that something was wrong and kept a distance. However, they still lingered around the ship with a strange look in their eyes. It seemed that they were waiting for the ship to crash so that they could catch the people on top. Very few humans can use the power of laws, but we beasts can. Don't you know? When the little monkey on Cu's shoulder heard this, it turned its head with a puzzled expression. Its red eyes looked at Yun Nuashing in confusion. Yun Nuashing and the others. What kind of bullsh *t was this? A heavenly god couldn't even use the power of laws? What the hell? It was probably a fake heavenly god. When the little monkey saw that their expressions had become strange, it scratched its head and didn't pay too much attention to them. Yun Nuashing stared at the ship for a while. He saw that the ship was swaying left and right for a distance as if it was a drunk driver. Thick smoke billowed. There's still a lot of energy left in the core of the ship. If it crashes, it will blow up the island below, right? The little monkey was stunned for a moment. He looked at the island below and nodded. It seems so. This place is closer to the inner circle in the middle circle. There are still many beasts who haven't escaped. They probably didn't sense the commotion, or maybe the wave of destruction didn't intend to destroy this place, probably. Yun Nuashing glanced at him and muttered. He saw that the metal ship was on the verge of collapsing. Its speed was getting slower and slower, and it was slowly unable to keep up with the speed of the beast tide. If it delayed any longer, it would probably fall straight down. Thinking that there were still locals above, he thought for a while and suddenly stood up. And Yuan had already asked everyone to use their energy to maintain the energy of the broken-winged bird. As the internal energy vibrations became more and more intense, the ship would crash even if they didn't use space oscillation and chaotic energy disturbances. However, this place didn't seem to be a suitable place to crash. There were still many islands below. If it exploded, the destructive energy waves would probably affect 4 or 5 islands in the middle circle. Anyway, it was inevitable that the ship would crash. He didn't want to preserve the ship's hull or anything. He simply asked everyone to speed up. It would be best if they could crash at a more spacious place between the middle circle and the inner circle. If they let this metal ship fall into the abyss, they would probably be caught by the beast. Continue to speed up. Hold on until we reach the inner circle. Forcing a large amount of energy to continue accelerating caused the ship to almost disintegrate. Everyone on the ship had already gathered on the upper deck, far away from the side of the ship that was filled with smoke from the explosion. They gathered together and used their energy to propel the ship down. The ship's speed had obviously increased as well. Soon, they caught up with the herd of beasts that were following them. Meanwhile, the iron giant bird was obviously getting more and more damaged. Just as Yuan was about to look at where they were, he felt a long-range energy explosion explode inside the ship. It almost split the poor bird in half. Everyone looked at each other in panic. They all turned to Yuan. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Can't hold on any longer, he mumbled to himself. At that moment, everyone suddenly heard a loud sound. The beast tide in front of them suddenly split to the left and right. The sound of chains being torn apart reverberated in the air. And Yuan and the others didn't have time to figure out what was going on. They only felt the ship tremble violently. Then, all the abnormal energy reactions stopped, and Yuan's eyes widened in shock. He saw a huge circle of white chains. Each of the chains was dozens of meters long. They carried a huge energy barrier around the broken bird. The chains were wrapped around the energy barrier, dragging them forward. His gaze followed the huge chains until he saw a scene that was branded in his soul. The chain extended all the way to 10,000 feet in front of them. On the back of a huge dragon, there was a person with a taut white chain wrapped around his hand. Monstrous power of rules burst out from his body. The power of rules wrapped around the broken ship along the chain, even forming an extremely stable barrier of rules. Seeing this, he was stunned. The people beside him also opened their mouths in disbelief. They had never seen a human with such power of rules. Even the overlords of the archipelago could not compare to 1/10,000th of this power of rules. In fact, Yun Nuashing was also stunned when he made his move. The chains extended for tens of thousands of meters. All the magical beasts within those tens of thousands of meters were staring at him with their huge eyes. They were all dumbfounded. Then, the people on the ship were also dumbfounded. At that moment, he finally understood how miserable the human race was. He had only used a little bit of power of law to attract such a huge crowd, all right. He admitted that he had used more than a little bit of power of law. After all, he wanted to save people. He didn't know how to handle this kind of thing, so he could only use a little bit of power. As for what he had to do to save people, it was something that had to be done in every world. For example, he had to disguise himself in another world, cough cough. No, he had to blend into this world and pretend to be a native. For this, he would need a bunch of people to help him provide information. For example, Dao Tian, who was beside him, and Star Pyrolite, who had been fooled. These were all successful examples. There weren't any more twists and turns in the road after that. The inexplicable destruction behind them finally destroyed 90% of the outer islands. It only affected about half of the central islands before it stopped. The furthest place it affected was just an unlucky island in the inner circle that was hit by a meteor. Half of the island sank by 10 meters. After confirming that the destruction wouldn't affect this place, a portion of the beast tide landed on the central and inner circle islands. A considerable portion of the beast tide followed the overlords like the little monkey and planned to go directly to the main continent. Perhaps they had sensed something in advance, or perhaps they were worried that something like this would happen again. Moreover, there were many mountains and forests on the main continent that they could use. However, they were more used to living on their original islands, which were quieter. Spirit-gathering continent. The last time I came to the main continent was 7,000 years ago. I didn't expect it to be so long since I left. I thought it had only been 100 or 200 years. The little monkey couldn't help but mutter as he looked at the vast land that was becoming clearer and clearer in front of him. Mr. Overlord, you don't like the main continent? Siyu asked curiously. Not really. It's just that the main continent isn't that peaceful. Moreover, it's more comfortable to stay in one's own mountain. The little monkey shook his head. Us overlords usually don't go to the main continent if we don't have anything to do. The children and juniors often come and go between the two places. Yun Nuoshing rolled her eyes. Then why are so many overlords coming to the main continent at the same time? Did something happen? I'm not sure yet. The little monkey shook his head. That little face of his revealed a very serious and dignified expression. When we left the main continent 7,000 years ago, it was after a chaotic war. This time, it's hard to say. Sigh, if the chaos this time is also caused by the chaotic abyss, I reckon that something troublesome is going to happen again. The little monkey sighed. From what they knew, the only thing that could cause such a huge impact on this world was the chaotic abyss below. Only it had such power. Chaotic abyss. Yun Nuoshing glanced at the dark abyss below. Along the way, he had heard the conversation of the beasts and noticed their attention. He already knew that the dark and swarthy pool of ink below was the so-called chaotic abyss. He fearlessly extended his divine soul into the chaotic abyss. Then, a very strange thing happened. His divine soul extended into the land of nothingness. There was only nothingness below. There was nothing. It was said that people who fell into the chaotic abyss never returned. At first, he didn't understand, but now, a group of human beings who couldn't even use the power of laws, falling into the land of nothingness would not have a good end. Only those whose comprehension of laws had reached the origin realm could basically ignore the effects of the land of nothingness. Moreover, they couldn't stay there for long periods of time. The human beings of this world, let's just look at the people in front of him for now. Their comprehension of laws matched their cultivation, but they couldn't use the power of laws. So it was no wonder that they would die after falling in. Speaking of which, it was strange. From what he had heard, the chaotic abyss was the most unstable factor of chaos in this world. It was just an empty land of nothingness, so how could something that could destroy the world appear? Or did the distorted life form do something to this world through the land of nothingness? The chaotic abyss? On the other side of the world, I Ching heard Sir Feng's message. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, Sir Feng, from the information I've gathered so far, the chaotic abyss has caused quite a few huge waves in this world. It was war. Huge chaotic life forms came out of the chaotic abyss in groups, spreading the flames of war across the main continent and the archipelago. In comparison, it's a bit like the underworld versus the eightfold realm, but that so-called chaotic abyss. It's just a land of nothingness. I already know about it. I just went to take a look, Yun Nuoxing replied. Then what else? I Ching scratched his head. With a wave of his hand, he had the horde continue towards the main continent. He was guiding the horde to take refuge. There's nothing else special. According to Sir Feng's information in the other world, this world might be a stage play that revolves around the chaotic abyss. For now, we haven't discovered any traces of breakers in this world. Is that so? Yun Nuoxing replied. Looking at the main continent before him, he said, There's no need to gather for now. Let's figure out what's going on in this world first. It just so happens that you're all scattered across the world. Let's end this as soon as possible. After all, it's only a matter of one world. Understood. Yun Nuoxing, who was deep in thought, heard a commotion. He looked up and saw that the horde around him had stopped. Siyu and the others were staring blankly behind them. Yun Nuoxing was startled. What's wrong? He asked as he raised his head. Then, he was startled. This time, he did not need to say anything to know what was going on. He was deep in thought and did not hold on to the chains of the laws. The giant iron bird that was dragging behind him fell towards the edge of the main continent. From that angle, it seemed that there was still some distance before it would fall to the main continent. The commotion was obviously the cries of the people on the ship. There was also the sound of a horde of demons flying around in panic. F***ck. Yun Nuoxing saw that the situation was not good. He screamed and quickly jumped down from the back of the WYRM. Siyu and the others saw that and jumped down as well. Chapter 1391. The scorched earth was like a scar left behind by a big fire. Traces of red and black mixed energy occasionally flashed under the ground and rushed to the core in front of him. Runes with twisted energy took root about 10 feet below the ground and intertwined into a group of tree root. Then, they spread toward the ground and formed a rune tree that was about 10 to 20 feet tall. The tree crown stretched out for hundreds of feet and covered the sky. Red and black energy particles fell from the tree as it swayed in the wind and soaked into the ground. Then, they flowed back to the tree through the roots and formed a self-connected cycle. The little monkey jumped among the group and reached out his hand to catch the falling energy particles. Suddenly, as if he had touched a flame, he shook his hand in pain and disgust. A low growl came from his throat. It's that disgusting energy. And Yuan's face was already solemn when he stepped into the forest of red and black energy runes. A surge of energy quietly surged into his hand. When he heard what the little monkey said, he nodded. It's the chaotic energy. Then, he showed a puzzled look. But, where did it come from? We have been closely monitoring the chaos abyss for the past 7,000 years and have never let our guard down. But we have never sensed any abnormal energy flow in that place. This forest of pure chaotic energy must have been created by a high-level life form. Yun Nuoxing turned and glanced at him. Have you forgotten what I said before we came in? This might not have appeared here in recent years. It might be the chaotic energy left behind on the main continent 7,000 years ago. They might have used some means to hide here. In the worst-case scenario, this might just be one of them. The main continent is so big. Maybe there are these things lurking in every nook and cranny. And Yuan, the little monkey and the other local people, had a drastic change in expression. If this was true, no, this had already happened once. What he said was very likely the truth. Although the chaotic tide 7,000 years ago was repelled by all the life forms on the main continent, there might still be remnants that had not been completely wiped out. They were lurking in the shadows of the main continent, waiting for the next chaotic tide to come. Looks like we have to report this as soon as possible. And Yuan's eyes flashed. While there was still no movement in the chaos abyss, he quickly ordered his men to investigate the borderlands. Those barren places that had not been visited for hundreds of years. This place was not found through any special means. It was exposed by itself. There might be other places. Let's go out first. I've caught a guy here. If we turn on the shield, I'm worried that he might send some information back. Yun Nuoshing waved his hand and walked towards the center of the ruined forest. Bang bang! After walking past a particularly large and twisted rune tree, Yun Nuoshing suddenly heard a few banging sounds behind him. He could not help but turn around. He saw Siyu, Feng Qinghuang, and the little monkey all holding their foreheads. There were tears in their eyes. He was very familiar with this look. It was just like when he was flying at a high speed and crashed into the energy shield. His forehead was all red. What's wrong? Jing Yuanji turned around in shock. Other than her and Feng Qinghuang, the others were left outside. It was as if there was a transparent shield that prevented others from entering. She could not help but be stunned. She walked to the side of the others and brushed her jade hands around the space beside her. She did not feel anything. Use your mental power, Yun Nuoshing said calmly. A layer of green energy curled around his palm. He gently waved it at the space in front of him. A transparent layer appeared in front of them because of the green energy. It's a mental shield. Jing Yuanji did as she was told. Soon, she found the hidden mental shield. The shield covered a large area in the center of the ruined forest. Those with insufficient mental power would be blocked and unable to enter. Jing Yuanji, stay outside. Help me look after Siyu and the others. Yun Nuoshing thought for a moment and said. Then, he turned around and walked alone into the depths of the ruined forest. I'll go in and take a look. Don't worry, there's nothing in this world that can threaten me. It won't change even if they come. Then, please be careful, Feng Qinghuang. Jing Yuanji nodded. She knew that this was a strange place. Feng Qinghuang did not feel comfortable leaving Siyu, the others, and the other peak heavenly gods outside. Siyu looked at the illuminated barrier and muttered. She could not help but slap the mental shield angrily. What the hell is this? Everyone smiled bitterly. Yun Nuoshing walked a few steps faster. The deeper they went into the realm of distortion, the more abnormal the things that appeared around them were. Although they were all weaved by distorted energy, their shapes became more and more distorted. Their shapes changed from trees to strange things. They turned into vines with skulls, thorns that looked like broken pieces of something, and some fruits that looked like spatial cracks. Through the palm-sized cracks, they could see another dimension, vivid and lifelike. When they reached the place where the red and black energy covered the brightest, there was no path forward. In front of them was a hemispherical red and black barrier about 1,000 feet in diameter. It was not transparent, and there were many twisted plants covering it. Right in front of them were 2 vines that were about 10 feet thick. You don't think that these things can stop me, do you? Yun Nuoshing sneered. The energy transformed into a giant sword that fell into her hand. She raised her hand and swung the sword down. The barrier in front of them crumbled into pieces like paper. Even the barrier had a big hole. The twisted plants on the edge grew wildly, as if they wanted to block the hole. Yun Nuoshing looked at this last-ditch struggle and shook her head. She walked forward with a thin layer of mental shield. The plants that tried to block the hole were smashed into pieces by the mental shield. The hole suddenly stopped repairing, and the twisted plants stopped moving. The person inside seemed to be restraining his power. Was he planning to fight to the death? After entering the space, Yun Nuoshing thought that he would see something crazy that would make one's heart tremble. However, there was only a charred land, an energy barrier that looked like an upside-down bowl, and in the center, a tumor on the ground. The top of the tumor was covered in dense red and black runes, which intertwined to form a huge tree. The tree's crown merged with the barrier. Under the tree, above the tumor, there was a figure sitting cross-legged. His entire body was wrapped in the runes that contained distorted energy. Only his palms, knees, and a head were exposed. He seemed to have merged with the tree. Yun Nuoshing narrowed her eyes and strode toward the tumor that was 1 meter above the ground. She stopped 2 meters away from the tumor. The young man sitting there opened his eyes with a bang. A pair of scarlet eyes filled with chaos and distortion. It was the same pair of eyes she saw in the illusion. "You're not from this world." The young man's scarlet eyes widened. He stared at Yun Nuoshing as if he wanted to tear her into pieces. "Who are you? Why are you here? You're not from this world either. Speaking of which, do you like to look down on others?" Yun Nuoshing crossed his arms and pursed his lips. Suddenly, he felt uncomfortable with his head raised, so he floated up more than a meter away from the ground and looked directly at him. "Well, this is much more comfortable. So, who are you? You can tell that I'm not from this world in an instant. That means that you shouldn't be from this world." The young man's head was still staring at Yun Nuoshing. He did not say anything. However, the latter could see that the young man's eyes twitched slightly. He seemed to be anxious and irritable. Yun Nuoshing could not help but chuckle. "Don't be so agitated. Did you find that you can't send messages out? You found that you've encountered a very strong resistance. All means of transmitting messages and communication are trapped in this space, right?" Yun Nuoshing's smile became even brighter. His expression became even darker. His exposed hands were clenched so hard that they creaked. "Who are you? Oh, didn't your elders tell you?" Yun Nuoshing grinned. She even deliberately took out a cloak and hung it behind her back. "Or did Long Sky not tell you these things?" When the young man saw the huge insignia on his cloak and heard him casually mention his boss's name, his expression changed drastically. His face turned as white as a sheet of cloth. "You're from the realm of the gods." Then, his expression became extremely twisted and violent. His roar shook the area covered by the barrier. "Despicable bastard! Damned people from the deity realm, why are you here? Why don't you guess?" Yun Nuoshing smiled in satisfaction and opened his arms. "Then, it's my turn to ask you. Twisted race. Oh, please don't mind. I don't know what you call yourselves, so I can only say it based on what I know. Oh, please don't be so agitated. Otherwise, you'll die from anger and I'll have to use some methods to revive you." The young man's furious expression suddenly trembled. Looking at the smiling man, an unknown fear surged in his heart. The fear surpassed the feeling of death. He felt extremely uneasy. Yun Nuoshing smiled for a while before her expression suddenly darkened. "You know what I want to ask without me saying it. What do you want to do by collecting materials from the void and creating hundreds of test subjects in hundreds of worlds?" Yun Nuoshing stopped talking for 3 seconds. Seeing the young man's dark expression, he did not mind. "You don't want to say? Or you don't know? It's fine. It's not important. A guy who hasn't even reached the origin realm. I don't think you know anything. You don't need to say anything. I'll find the answer myself." The young man was stunned for a moment. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt that the surrounding atmosphere had changed. It became extremely gloomy. He widened his eyes in horror. Only then did he see that he did not know when circles of green chains had wrapped around his body. The entire tree and the entire tumor were wrapped with huge green chains. One end of the chains pierced deeply into the ground, as if it was binding him to the ground. And there were also 2 slender chains spinning in front of his eyes. He suddenly thought of something. He gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to burn his spirit and soul, Yun Nuoshing had already appeared in front of him. You want to die? I'm here. Do you think you have a right to die? Yun Nuoshing sneered. Her hand quickly reached out and grabbed the young man's forehead. A violent and dark energy caused a surge. The young man's mind was immediately stunned. Before he could use his self-detonation technique, it was immediately suppressed. Then, the two mental chains that were waiting by the side saw the opportunity and stabbed into his brain. Arg! The young man let out a shrill scream. The burning and probing of his soul and spirit almost caused his soul to collapse. That scream, which was mixed with a roar, pierced through the seal of this place. Jing Yuanji and the others, who were waiting outside, were startled by this sudden burst of screams. It's not Sir Feng's voice. Jing Yuanji carefully identified it for a while before letting out a sigh of relief. She waved her hand at everyone. Don't worry. It's fine. It's fine. And Yuanji smiled bitterly. There was such a painful roar coming from inside, but she still said it was fine. Although he could tell that it was not Yun Nuoshing's voice, there should be another something inside. He didn't know what it was, but he didn't think it was a human. In such a place, in such an environment, how could there be a human? It was probably some kind of humanoid chaos spawned from the chaos abyss. Yun Nuoshing violently tore apart all the defenses in his mind, threw away the useless things, and directly entered his memory. It was like a treasure trove that was directly opened in front of him. Everything was clear at a glance. The sea of memories of the young man was different from his sea of memories. It was a place full of sand and rock. At this moment, countless memories were exposed from the corners of this scene. They were discovered little by little and then engraved all of them. Kill me if you can. The young man's consciousness in the sea of memories roared madly at Yun Nuoshing, the outsider. But even in his own territory, he couldn't do anything to the outsider. Did I say that I would allow you to live? Yun Nuoshing glanced at him and quickly went through all the possible memories that he needed. The wisp of mental strength then withdrew from the young man's sea of memories. It took him 10 seconds to sort out the memories. He couldn't help but frown. Other than 1 or 2 orders, I really don't know anything. But I do know a way to leave this area. Oh, there's a higher level area. So it goes up 1 level at a time? This level only has experimental subjects at the peak of the celestial god realm or below. Above that, there's origin realm. Currently, the most advanced experimental subject is only at the 5th celestial layer of origin realm. I'm really curious. What kind of strange idea are you planning to create such a fake kingdom and become the god of it? Or are you observing the actions of the experimental subjects when you're God, and trying to deduce something from it? What do you want from it? Yun Nuoshing only thought that he was mumbling to himself. He didn't expect the young man to answer him. The latter was currently panting heavily with his head lowered. His eyes were filled with unconcealable killing intent and madness. Yun Nuoshing noticed the gaze, but he didn't care. Save it. Even your boss, Chong Kong, wouldn't dare to act like that in front of me. Last time, he was lucky enough to escape with his army. Do you really think he's that capable? The realm of the gods. Feng Ling. The moment he said those words, the young man immediately found the identity of the person in front of him in his mind. A chill spread throughout his body. With the chill came an even crazier and more thorough killing intent. The distorted energy burned up. Kill. Oh, you still have a plan to kill me? Huh. You want to take me down with this little power? You really think too highly of yourselves. Yun Nuoshing chuckled and waved his hand in front of him. Bang! A huge force bombarded the young man and the young man in front of him. Countless red and black runes exploded. The young man's body flew backward with the rune fragments. He rolled over a dozen times like a gourd and left a scratch on the ground. The tree also collapsed to the side. Maggots of the Order faction, even if you were. Forget it, every race has their own difficulties, there's no point in explaining it so clearly. I only need to know that your existence has become a pest, that's enough. As pests, you should be mentally prepared to be exterminated. What you want to do is your business, that's your right. On the other hand, what I want to do, how I want to do, that's my business, my right. Yun Nuoshing walked toward the young man in a condescending manner. His body flickered with light. Some fragments of light appeared beside his temple. Those were the memories that he had just plundered. He only kept the information and destroyed the useless memories. Anyway, they weren't good memories. There was no point in keeping them. Boom! The young man stood up abruptly. His body was burning with red and black flames. The burning distorted energy caused the surrounding space to distort crazily. He looked like a small sun. He charged toward Yun Nuoshing without fear of death. The energy that had been accumulating for a long time suddenly exploded, and the distorted area suddenly erupted with an unusually bright light. I'll send you on your way. Yun Nuoshing watched as the young man risked his life to detonate all the energy. A cold light flashed in his eyes. A ball of dark red energy appeared in his hand. When the sun-like figure rushed in front of him, he slapped the ball of dark red energy into the latter's body. Then, the two energies exploded in an instant. The energy that contained endless destructive power collided violently with the distorted energy. The eruption of the new energy tore the hemispherical area into pieces. In an instant, an energy storm that contained the energy of the way that could not be released rushed out like a flood. Suddenly, the entire world shook, and space and time trembled together. Boom! Following the violent explosion of energy, Jing Yuanji's eyes widened. She saw a violent energy storm erupting from the depths of the distorted area. The destructive power and the distorted energy were entangled. The storm raged in front of her in the blink of an eye. She quickly put up an energy barrier. However, as soon as she put up the barrier, the energy storm that rushed out like a beast that had just broken out of its cage was affected by a powerful suction force. It began to shrink rapidly. In just 4 or 5 seconds, it had shrunk back to the center of the energy explosion. In front of her were only the energy particles left behind when the high energy raged. There was also a large crater. It was only a large crater that reminded them that there was an explosion of energy just now. What the? And Yuanji's jaw dropped. He looked at the huge crater that appeared in front of him and was speechless for a long time. The energy explosion was even bigger than the one caused by the largest war 7,000 years ago. He firmly believed that if the energy wasn't contained in the end, this area would have turned into a large crater in an instant. The little monkey was so shocked that its hair stood on end. It looked at Siyu, who had stars in her eyes, and quickly rushed to her shoulder. It whispered in her ear, "Who are you people? There can't be such a powerful life form among humans." "Mr. Overlord." Siyu was startled by the voice beside her ear. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Sorry, the organization has a rule that we can't reveal our identities. Hee, but don't worry, we're here to help you." The little monkey was dumbfounded. It scratched its head so hard that it became bald. The mixed energy in the energy explosion has a strong aura of chaotic energy. However, it was suppressed by an even more powerful force. There should be a life form from the chaos abyss inside, and Yuanji scratched his head and said. Suddenly, he saw a figure appear in the area in front of him. He quickly said, "Someone's coming out." A few people and a few magical beasts turned their gazes, and as expected, they saw Yun Nuoshing walking out slowly in the air with one hand on his waist. After seeing everyone, he shrugged his shoulders and walked out from the position of the barrier after a while. Oh, speaking of the barrier, that barrier had disappeared along with the death of the unlucky guy inside. And Yuanji thought for a moment and realized that he didn't know how to address the person in front of him. He could only ask directly, "Excuse me, where is the chaos derivative inside? If you're talking about the guy inside, he's already dead." Yun Nuoshing shrugged. And Yuanshi smiled bitterly and shook his head helplessly. Thinking about the explosion of energy just now, he also felt that no one would be able to walk out safely except for the person in front of him. What a pity! He had wanted to borrow him for the group of scholars to study. Chapter 1393. Sometimes, he would feel that his strange ability had evolved to the point where he could affect the concept of rules wherever he went. It had even developed into an unlucky phenomenon, and wherever he went, bad luck would befall the world he went to. It was probably because the laws of the pinnacle of origin were too strong, and it was easy for the world that ate him to suffer from indigestion. For example, the world he just came out from, and the world he was in now. Since there was no normal world in the void, indigestion directly led to diarrhea. It was not his fault for thinking that way. Was there a big difference between the sudden emergency of these two worlds and the emergency of a human? It came quickly, and it was carried out quickly. If he did not hurry, then, the topic seemed to be a little twisted. In short, what he meant was that the things that happened in these two worlds were too sudden and too urgent. Just now, the world that sailed across the stars and fought a war relied on the chaotic period to make everyone lose their minds. But in this world, they directly used an army to pressure the border, pressuring the human race and demons to join forces, and did not give him any time to prepare. In the previous world, at least 2 or 3 people told him about the situation in this world. This world was very powerful, and before he could stand firm, they directly attacked with their entire army, wanting to beat him to death. No one should know that he had come in. Then he could only blame this world for being unlucky. Well, it seems that it became unlucky because of him. He was also very desperate. He also knew that his bad luck was enough to penetrate the concept of rules and directly affect this world. Was he not planning to stay and clean up the mess? The situation along the way was very chaotic. They were not the only ones who were moving on such a large scale, there were many other demons as well. The overlords who had just moved to several directions also received the news and began to gather in the central region. However, not all forces were concentrated in the central region. The area of the vast spirit condensation continent was larger than the divine realm, and was equivalent to half the surface area of all the planets in a complete light cluster of a world. He was just making up this area, and it was just a measurement. He did not carefully measure how big this world was, and it was the first time he had seen such a model of a world. There was no starry sky, no stars, no celestial bodies, and no nebula. There was only a main continent that occupied the entire light cluster of the world, and hundreds of thousands of islands floating around it. In short, it was very big. It was just that the sky was a bit monotonous. There was only the never-extinguishing polar day, and there was no night or starry sky. Well, I digress again. The Flood Dragon and the other overlords did not fly very fast. These overlords who led the way deliberately controlled their speed, so that the beasts below would not lose their sense of direction. Yun-Nuashing could not help but cast her gaze down below. Smoke and dust billowed like a boundless sandstorm. Below them were millions of beasts that gathered from all directions. They were either galloping in the air or running rapidly on the ground. The vigorous movement was enough to make the mountains tremble. Along the way they would see some cities of similar scale. Those were the cities that he had mentioned. Those cities had prepared many defensive forces in order to deal with the tide of chaos. Instead of mobilizing more forces, they might as well just stay where they were and use all the means they had in their lives to strengthen their defenses. Yun-Nuashing suddenly raised her head. There was a trace of doubt between her brows. Then why did they go to the central part of the main continent? Since they were going to stay where they were, why didn't they just stay there and wait for the people behind to send reinforcements? Wouldn't it be superfluous to go there and then come back? She tilted her head and looked at Yuanshi, who had a serious and dignified expression. Speaking of which, And Yuanxing had left those who were following her in the first city they saw to strengthen the defense. He himself led the beasts to the central part of the spirit-gathering continent. As expected, there was a need, like a battle plan or something. But since An Yuanxing did not mention it, Yun Nuoxing could not say it. Her identity was a mystery. Even the monkey would feel that something was wrong if she asked a few more questions. He did not know how the people of the spirit-gathering continent treated the identity of outsiders. He could only keep it a secret for now. Siyu blinked as if she could sense his inner thoughts. She suddenly pulled his clothes and asked, "Little star, why are we rushing back to the central part of the continent?" Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. He was sweating profusely because he did not know. But when he turned around, he saw the cunning look in the little girl's eyes. He was slightly stunned again. After a while, he said, "Have you forgotten? I told you before." "Oh yes, I only mentioned it. You have only heard about it. After all, you have not experienced the tide of chaos 7,000 years ago." But I'm tired of talking about it. Now we have to start accumulating energy. When we start fighting later, we won't have time to rest. You over there, you can talk to her when you have time." And Yuan, who was still in a contemplative posture, was stunned. He turned around and saw Siyu and Feng Qinghuang looking at him curiously. He smiled bitterly and turned around. Yun Nuoxing was already in a meditative state. He smiled bitterly and said, "My name is Yuan. I have already said it 3 times. Forget it." And Yuan shook his head helplessly and looked at the front again. "Let's go back and help activate the rising sun. After that, we will return to that place and defend. You have not experienced it yourself, so you don't know how terrifying the tide of chaos is. Every time we start fighting from the furthest point of the battle, we have to hold on for a minute and a second. When we can't hold on anymore, we will gather our energy and shrink the defensive line. Every time we retreat and shrink the battlefield, it means that we have lost a piece of territory. The tide of chaos will take this opportunity to expand and the battle will become more and more intense. The battle will last for a long time. Very long. Without the power of the rising sun, we won't be able to hold on for that long." Yun Nuoxing opened his closed eyes slightly and revealed a thoughtful expression. It seemed that the so-called rising sun was something created by this world to fight against the tide of chaos. He even deliberately looked at the sky, but he saw nothing. He thought that the rising sun that An Yuan was referring to was the rising sun that he knew. After saying that, An Yuan fell silent. Siyu could tell that he was in a heavy mood and didn't want to talk much. Siyu didn't keep asking him questions. She secretly threw a glance at Yun Nuoxing with a "praise me" expression on her face. Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes. She lowered her hand and pinched An Yuan's little hand. And Yuan thought that this action was too perfunctory. However, when he saw the satisfied expression on the girl's face, well, she seemed to have let it go. As for what the so-called rising sun was, An Yuan had a lot of guesses. However, he would know when he arrived at the place later. Yun Nuoxing suddenly narrowed his eyes. There was an unusually dazzling light in front of him. It was very bright and came from far ahead. It was still out of the sight of others, but it was already in his field of vision. The unusually bright light was like a golden sun rising from the east. Looking at the center of the light, he could vaguely see a building or a group of buildings. It was a huge circle of buildings that covered a very wide area. They were connected in a uniform style. From the outside to the inside there was only one kind of cylindrical tower. There was a difference in height between the towers, but their appearance was basically the same. From the outside to the inside there was a circle of taller towers. Although there was an obvious difference in height, there was no obvious division. Looking at it from different directions, the height of the towers in the same circle was uneven. However, the shortest tower in the inner circle was not shorter than the tallest tower in the outer circle. This circular building complex was probably more than 10 million miles in diameter. The tower in the center, which was surrounded by stars, was as huge as the pillar of creation. It looked like layers of mountains. The golden light was emitted from this huge building complex. It was like a huge golden sun. Just by looking at it, one could feel the enormous power. The energy reaction inside was constantly increasing. Energy from all directions on the earth was constantly flowing into the mountain-like building. It's gathered the energy of the entire continent. Yun Nuoxing glanced over the ground. The energy of the entire continent was following a single command to the center, which was the building complex. It was like the center of a huge whirlpool, devouring the energy of the entire continent. That was not all. He saw countless lifeforms gathered at the foot of the mountains. Whether they were humans or magical beasts, they were all channeling their energy into the golden sun, causing it to shine even more resplendently. Even he became slightly moved when he saw this. This was what he had once envisioned in the 139th era, gather all the life in the world to approach reciprocity. No, apart from an insurmountable chasm, this level has already reached the level of reciprocity. This region of space was abundant with gods. Coupled with the fact that this was truly the energy of the entire world, the energy gathered together could really reach reciprocity. However, no matter how much energy there was, the divinity and laws would not be able to reach reciprocity. However, to be able to reach this level, how should he put it? Seeing the life forms of this world reach this level was like understanding a regret and resentment in his heart. Something that could not be done in the God's world back then could be done in this world. Was this trying to tell him something? Yun Nuoxing shook his head and stopped thinking about the meaning he had given himself. His black eyes reflected the golden sunlight. He could not help but say, "The rising sun has risen." And Yuan was stunned. He glanced at the distant holy city that he could not even see the outline of before looking back at Yun Nuoxing. He seemed to be able to see the reflection of the golden sun in his eyes. "You can already see it? The people in the holy city have already begun to gather the rising sun when they sensed the chaos in the chaos abyss. There was no preparation, no discussion. We have already been living in a state of preparation. No matter when the chaos abyss appears, we can make the rising sun rise immediately. However, this is not enough. The energy gathered in the holy city and the surrounding cities is not enough. We need the energy of the entire world. However, this level of rising sun is not enough to stop the chaotic tide." And Yuan gritted his teeth and could not help but sigh. Yun Nuoxing shrugged. They were fighting against the chaotic tide caused by the distorted races. It was just like how they were fighting against the underworld in the void. Both were similar. The only difference was that one was happening in a world, while the other was happening in the void. Although the scale of the battle and the power used to guide the battle were not on the same level, the meaning was the same. They were just fighting to survive the next day. Yun Nuoxing let out a long sigh and shook his head. His eyes suddenly paused as they fell upon the abyss in front of him. The abyss was unusually wide. Even if he used his eyes to look at it, he had to sweep his head across the entire plain from left to right before he could barely take in the abyss. Fortunately, this continent was just a plain like the realm of the gods. If it was on another planet, he would have to stand up and look at the entire planet to see it. That abyss. Feng Qinghuang stared at the dark abyss. She did not know how long it was. It was so wide that it looked like it could swallow 1,000,000 mountains. There are many lives buried here. There are many auras of life that have dissipated. There are also many lingering spirits and lingering spirit. And those spirits and lingering life energy are being transmitted to a distant place. And Yuanxing also saw that they had flown to this place. His expression became a little complicated. He could not help but lower his head. He pressed his hands on his chest and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Yun Nuoshing tilted his head and looked at the bottom of the abyss. There was nothing. There were only rocks and dust that filled the abyss. However, the entire abyss was filled with faint green and purple auras. Those were lingering spirits and lingering spirit. There were many lives buried here. Feng Qing Huang could sense it. It was normal that the number of lives that had fallen here was terrifying. The abyss of the dead. And Yuanshi finished his prayer and raised his head to look at the abyss below. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the abyss had been covered by a layer of transparent spatial power. The beasts were crossing the wide abyss as if they were walking on flat ground, completely unaffected. The final battle 7,000 years ago took place here. Most of the lives died here, and the king was buried here as well. At that time, this place was still a lush mountain range. Who would have thought that after that battle, the land here only recovered nearly 1,000 years ago, let alone the mountains. Even now, it's still a bit barren. The abyss that was left behind even blocked the eastern side from communicating with the holy city until a god who was skilled in spatial power was instructed to seal the abyss that was engraved with pain with spatial power. And Yuanshi looked at the abyss below him and said, "That's where the last battle took place 7,000 years ago. Most of the lives were lost here." Siyu looked at the abyss carefully. However, she could only see the beasts running across it. She looked at Yun Nuoshing worriedly. "Will the battle be as serious this time? This is really hard to say." And Yuanshing was the one who answered. He smiled bitterly and rolled up his sleeves to reveal the scarlet runes on his body. He showed it to them and also to himself. Since the birth of this world, this is the most intense eruption of the chaos abyss. The resonance it caused is also the most intense. I have never seen anything like this before. Although it may hurt our morale to say something like this before the battle, it is an undeniable fact. Before the battle, all life must be prepared to face a disaster of this magnitude, and not foolishly believe that it is an absolute victory or something like that. "Resonance," Yun Nuoshing murmured. Suddenly she said, "I thought only we knew about this. I did not expect you to know about it too." The energy of the chaos abyss and Yuanshing smiled. His expression became a little strange. Not many people know about it. Aside from those who discovered it by themselves, only the scholars and us who often deal with scholars know that most of the energy in our bodies is the same as the energy of the chaos abyss. If this matter were to spread, it would probably cause panic. That is why everyone who knows about it did not say it out loud. They kept it in their hearts until they could not hold it in anymore. But there is no need to worry. The energy in our bodies is controllable. It is not like the monsters from the chaos abyss that are out of control and without restraint. Yun Nuoshing, Jing Yuanji, and Dao Heaven looked at each other. The three of them looked at each other for a moment before they looked away. This world was a little special. The world they lived in had many more ways to use the distorted energy compared to this world. However, they still could not understand this matter. However, a certain number of people in this world knew about it. Boom! Suddenly, a world-shaking energy wave resounded across the horizon. The expressions of everyone and the numerous magical beasts changed as they raised their heads at the same time. They saw a ripple streaking across the clear sky, followed by a second ripple, a third ripple, and finally, a scarlet-colored distorted energy wave swept across the sky. Too fast, and Yuanshing looked at the ripples and the scarlet shockwave in the sky. His face sank slightly. The chaos abyss has begun to hit the barrier of the main continent. It is faster than before. How long can the barrier last? The little monkey looked at the wave-like ripples in the sky and could not help but grimace. They had not reached the holy city and had not raised the rising sun, but the chaos abyss had already come. I don't know. The energy barrier has been completely repaired. However, the strength of the chaos tide we encountered this time is unprecedented. 7,000 years ago, the barrier lasted for 2 days, giving us enough time to react. Moreover, their speed is not as fast as this time. And Yuanxing was sweating profusely. One day, Yun Nuoxing suddenly stood up, his eyes glowing with a silvery white light. He looked into the distance, at the edge of the main continent. He saw a thick layer of black clouds that surrounded the entire continent. Scarlet lightning flashed through the clouds from time to time, and there were so many that he couldn't even count them all. The number is measured in trillions, and the turmoil in the chaotic abyss hasn't ended yet. I'm afraid that this number will increase by 1,000, 10,000 times. Under this kind of pressure, this barrier can only last for less than a day and a half. And if we count in their more powerful attacks, it'll be a day. Give up on that large piece of unprepared land at the edge of the main continent, and the official battle will begin in a day and a half. We can make it, and Yuanxing said, his face sweating profusely. We are less than 10 minutes away from the holy city. We can gather the power of all life there, raise the rising sun, and rush back to defend. It won't take a day. There's still time. The little monkey scratched its head. It looked at the scarlet runes on its body and suddenly said, the most powerful chaos tide in history was measured in trillions as well, but it was not as powerful as this. This time, does this world intend to use all its power to destroy us and the spirit-gathering continent? If that is the choice of fate, I will face it calmly when the final moment comes. Yun Nuoxing wrinkled her nose. She reached out and grabbed the little monkey by the scruff of its neck and lifted it up. She said disdainfully, bullshit fate. Listen up, in this world, there is still your own fate. You will always control it in your own hands, and there will never be another chance to challenge it. Then, let's end it all this time. We have withstood it for thousands of years, and the spirit-gathering continent is still alive and vigorous. This time, we are just betting on everything. How can we not make it through? The little monkey bared its teeth and struggled for a while before jumping down from Yuanxing's hand. It looked at him with its arms akimbo. Humans are so talkative. I understand even if you don't say it. We see the holy city. And Yuanxing pointed ahead and suddenly exclaimed. Everyone turned to look. They could see a huge golden sun hanging thousands of miles above the ground. From this distance, it looked like a golden star. However, they could already see the shape of the sphere. Although it looked like the sun, it did not have the same temperature as the sun. Lords, we will go first. Tell the beasts to speed up. And Yuanxing waved his hand and said loudly. We know even if you don't tell us. The overlords at the side were still in the mood to smile. Then, the highest-level magical beast overlords and human beings in the sky took the lead and rushed toward the holy city. At the same time, there were similar movements in countless directions on the main continent. From afar, it looked like a circular sandstorm was sweeping toward the center of the continent from afar. This distance should be enough. Now that they did not need to lead the way, they arrived outside the holy city in 2 or 3 minutes. Yun Nuoxing looked up at the huge golden building that looked like a sky-reaching tower and the huge golden sun that hung high on one side. It was a highly compressed energy amalgamation that carried the energy of the entire main continent and the energy of countless lives. At this moment, in the sky and on the ground around the holy city, there were tens of millions of lives making gestures of prayer, offering their energy and fusing it with the rising sun. And Yuanxing, the little monkey, and the others who had just arrived did not rest or make any preparations. They directly began to transfer energy. The energy that emerged from their bodies turned into a faint golden stream that surged toward the huge golden sun in the sky. There were tens of millions of such streams in the surroundings. It's not enough. Even the magnitude is not enough to reach the level of origin. Yun Nuoxing squinted his eyes slightly. The energy ball that condensed countless life energy was now undergoing a terrifying energy reaction inside. It contained a large amount of divinity and rules, and it was unified, not the kind of mottled and mixed divinity. Unified divinity and rules. Is it because of that building, that holy city? He looked at the mountain-like building and suddenly saw clearly that the mountain-like building was engraved with golden and scarlet runes. It was the existence of those runes that unified the divinity and rules that should have been modeled and mixed. Tisk tsk. This great array is a little impressive. Seeing through the function of the array, made of runes at a glance, Yun Nuoxing could not help but exclaim in her soul. I heard that the human lives in this world could not use the power of rules. I was wondering how they could resist the chaotic tide when they were so weak. Tsk. If this array before us is formed, as long as the rising sun does not fall, all lives within the range of the rising sun will not run out of energy. It could also activate the power of the distorting runes in their bodies within a safe range. It's a large-scale support array, Jing Yuanji said. But this cluster of energy is man-made, right? How can it ensure that the energy will not run out? Siyu muttered. Yun Nuoxing looked at her and pointed up. The void, the source of energy, is the void. This array, the rising sun, is a key and array used for conversion. In other words, it is borrowing power from the void. A person borrowing power from the void is like a person carrying a bucket of the same size to fetch water from a lake. Sooner or later, the supply will not meet the demand. However, there are so many people and lives here. The size of the bucket is a little exaggerated, and other factors will not change because of this. Is this the trump card of this world? Feng Qinghuang said and suddenly shook her head. Little star, I think it's not just that. Well, this is just a rough idea. The rest will depend on what happens in the actual battle. As Yun Nuoxing spoke, he suddenly froze and cast his gaze towards the mountain-like buildings. On a tall tower closer to the center, there was a pair of eyes that met his. It was an old man dressed in white who had the air of an immortal. His snow-white beard had grown to his waist. In this world, there's actually a life form of this level? The old man and Yun Nuoxing looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, the old man looked up at the golden sun and closed his eyes. It seems that the heavens do not want our spirit-gathering continent to die. Chapter 1394. They did not know how history recorded the tides of chaos. Perhaps it was described as a passing storm or a cruel war. For the time being, they did not care about the tides of chaos that had happened in the past. As they watched the tides of chaos rioting and gathering at the first line of defense, they only had one thought in their minds. That's right. It was a storm that could swallow the entire spirit-gathering continent. The energy that the abyss of chaos had accumulated for more than 7,000 years was unleashed all at once. It destroyed all the islands except for the main continent in the blink of an eye. The first wave of energy caused the main continent's barrier to sound an alarm. It destroyed most of the land at the edge of the continent. Mountains and forests evaporated into thin air. The strongest defensive barrier of the spirit-gathering continent was on the verge of collapse in the face of the unprecedented tides of chaos. Even before the sun rose, the barrier started to crack. The minions of chaos stepped onto the land and spread the uncontrollable chaos energy across the land and sky. The many defensive measures and monitoring runes set up at the edge of the continent and the official battlefield were all destroyed the moment they came into contact with the chaos energy. They only had time to send back a message that they had been destroyed. The silver lining was that even though the barrier had cracked open, the small crack could only allow the minions of chaos to enter the main continent at a limited speed. The black cloud started to split into small streams and flowed into this dimension. It had been almost half a day since the series of energy waves caused the barrier to crack. On the eastern side of the main continent, a magnificent node city stood on the land. Countless runes set up around it were injecting energy into the barrier that stretched out for millions of miles. The node city, which had been emptied, was at the forefront of the barrier. This was the first line of defense. The node city on the eastern side was connected to several other cities on the other side. Once the front line collapsed, the entire city would fall apart. Before that happened, they had to retreat to the second line of defense, using a stronger barrier and more powerful energy to attack and defend. At the moment, the blindfolded youth was standing on the walls of the node city, looking at the clear sky. He could not help but look down at his bandaged hands, and then behind him. He could not see the giant golden sun. It had not risen yet. He was a little nervous. Just an hour ago, it was confirmed that the Chaos Tide and the Minions of Chaos had destroyed some of the runes set up outside the node city. Then, according to the nature of the Minions of Chaos, they would gather an army in 2 hours at the latest to attack the node city. Fortunately, all they had to do was to hold on until the sun rose, until reinforcements arrived. While those minions were not very intelligent, they would definitely not charge at them one by one. They would plunder energy to divide. If there were only 4 or 5 of them when they first found them, there would be 400 or 500 of them when they arrived. If there were more of them, the energy between them would resonate on their own, forming a more powerful domain and multiplying the speed of their division. He had seen such things many times. Phew! The blindfolded young man rubbed his hands and couldn't help but look back. This node city used to be the most prosperous city within 1,000,000 miles of this area in the past 7,000 years. At this moment, the ordinary people here had been moved to the holy city. The residences that used to stand in great numbers, the luxurious but useless buildings, and the noisy places were all gone. Only the scars and debris left behind by the violent demolition were left behind. From afar, the city looked like it was riddled with holes. On this desolate land, more and more rune buildings were erected. Some were used to supply energy, some were used to condense attacks, and some were used to support energy barriers. He couldn't help but smile bitterly as he looked at the scars all over the ground. They hadn't even started fighting, and they had already destroyed the city. But then again, the 7,000 years of peace had made people subconsciously forget about the terror of the Chaos Tide. No, they hadn't forgotten, they had simply hidden the despair and cries of that time deep in their memories. Now that they had returned with unprecedented destructive power, those deeply hidden memories surfaced once again. The people who were guarding this city had unhesitatingly chosen the most advantageous arrangement for the upcoming battle. They hadn't spent much time at all, and everyone had volunteered to do so. Those residences, those buildings. This city had been prosperous for more than 7,000 years. Even during the last chaotic tide, it still stood here. Even when it was breached, it did not collapse. The blindfolded youth tightened his robe and suddenly said to the people beside him. The soldiers in silver and red armor saluted him and nodded. Yes, it is indestructible, at least until we retreat it is indestructible. How long have you been guarding this city? The blindfolded young man smiled. He could not help but caress the rune-engraved wall of the node city. Even though it had been repaired many times, it still could not hide the massive damage left behind by the spawn of chaos. Now, the wall was emitting a faint energy radiance. Under the radiance, one could vaguely see some terrifying scars that could not be truly hidden. However, if one were to look closely, one would not be able to see those scars. It was as if those scars were just an illusion. My lord, I have already witnessed 2 chaos tides in this node city. The soldier stood straight like a spear. There was a hint of pride and confidence in his voice. Last time, I stood guard on this wall with you for 2 hours. The blindfolded youth smiled and did not say anything. He had stood guard in this city 5 times. The soldiers beside him had changed batches after batches. He did not have any special impression of this young soldier beside him. He just felt that he had heard his voice somewhere before. That was why he could not help but ask. The blindfolded youth turned around and pointed at the towering runic tower in the center of the city. What's the situation of that tower? The main tower of the node barrier is stable. I received a report from there 2 minutes ago. The soldier answered simply. There was no superfluous words. It was really like a spear. It would just stand there without anyone wielding it. The blindfolded youth looked at the runic tower that was emitting scarlet energy. It was a runic building that was newly developed in the past 7,000 years. It was somewhat unbelievable. It used the controllable distorted energy that existed in the sky and earth of this world for defense. It could also suppress the energy of the spawn of chaos by half, using their energy to deal with them. However, this thing actually had some flaws. For example, when the number of enemies reached a certain level, the suppressive effect would weaken. It might even be countered. If they were facing a real chaotic tide, this thing would be useless. But now they were facing a group of vanguards. This thing came in handy. As for how effective it would be, he could not tell. Boom! A huge roar of energy reverberated between heaven and earth. The blindfolded youth and the others jerked their heads back and looked at the sky solemnly. How many times had it been? The 7th time? Or the 8th time? Ever since the chaotic tide began to hit the barrier had been holding on for a full day. The cracks and small streams of chaotic current meant that the barrier that protected the spirit condensation continent was almost at its limit. The 8th time. The chaotic tide's vanguard should be in front of us soon. The blindfolded youth rubbed his face with both hands and let out a long breath. He was about to instruct everyone to be fully focused and ready for battle when suddenly, an even more violent roar came from the sky. Boom! Huge crimson shockwaves came from all directions. This time, the shockwaves came from multiple directions. The barrier of the spirit-gathering continent was hit several times at once. They could no longer see the ripples on the barrier. Only the traces of the crimson energy shockwaves could be seen in the sky. The 9th. Impossible! How could it be so fast? The blindfolded youth's eyes widened in horror. The Chaos Spawn had used an entire day to send out 8 energy blasts of sufficient strength, and the interval between each one was extremely long. How could it suddenly send out consecutive blasts now? Boom! Another tremor resounded through the sky. This time, the sound was slightly different. It didn't sound like the sound of energy colliding with the energy barrier. It sounded like something huge had slammed into the barrier, causing it to tremble. Can you still contact the runes outside? The blindfolded youth's eyes flashed as he asked calmly. The soldier beside Joshua took 2 steps forward. His armor clanked against metal. After a brief moment, he calmly shook his head. My lord, all the runes left outside for surveillance have been destroyed. Now that the tide of darkness is coming, we have lost control of the border. There's no way to get any information from there. The blindfolded youth gritted his teeth. He knew the result, but he would not give up if he did not say anything. If that's the case, go to the second line of defense and send a message. Tell them that the situation has changed. The Chaos Spawn may have a new attack method. The barrier shook violently and the sound of cracks cracking. The blindfolded youth's expression changed again. His words became much more hurried. The barrier may not last for 2 more days. Ask the rear to get into position as soon as possible. Don't worry about the arrangements. If the first line of defense cannot hold on, the second line of defense will only be a decoration. That's all, go. The soldier responded and disappeared in a flash. Just as he left, the blindfolded young man turned his head abruptly. He suddenly felt a gust of cold wind blowing towards him. Even though he was at the peak of the divine realm, he felt a chill in his ribs. His pupils shrunk and he looked outside the city. The sky suddenly turned dark. Thick black clouds had taken over the sky. It was whispering some information to him in a low voice. It was whispering in his ears, telling him that the tide of chaos was coming. In the distance, no, it was not far. It was perhaps less than 100,000 feet away. Near the horizon, there was a smear of black. It was very faint, but it was an eyesore and of very conspicuous black. It was accompanied by the black clouds that threatened to destroy the city. The clouds and rolling thunder faintly echoed above everyone's heads. In the forest below, scarlet flames suddenly appeared. The exceedingly dense energy ignited the scarlet flames, devouring the mountains and forests in the distance. That speck of black walked unbridled in the scarlet sea of flames, as if it was a demon walking in hell. The sentries who were already on standby reacted the moment the scarlet flames ignited. Their stern cry swept across the city along with the cold wind. Observed the chaos tide taking shape. Mid-level scale, attack is coming. The whistling sound of energy instantly woke the entire city. The energy that came with the whistling sound crashed into the barrier. The scarlet light from the energy explosion caused everyone to prepare for attack and defense. They thought that what followed would be a storm of attacks. However, the entire sky was strangely quiet. The blindfolded young man waved his hand to disperse the light of the energy explosion before him. He could not help but frown. The pair of eyes behind the cloth saw the chaos tide that was moving slowly. That was right, it was really moving slowly. In the past, when the barrier collapsed, the chaos tide should have rushed in wave after wave. That group of manifestations without intelligence would only destroy everything in front of them. They would burn the mountains, rivers, and oceans. Then, like a madman, they would attack their barrier like a tidal wave. They would attack the node barrier from all directions. The scale was far from this large, according to the past. The chaos tide should have fought with them half an hour ago. Then, their brains would be smashed out. He would also need to put in effort to arrange for people to guard the gaps in the defense and open up the node barrier with an extremely wide range. But now, what he saw was a chaos tide that was neatly arranged and marching at a steady speed. It was a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. Even though the pair of scarlet eyes hidden in the black fog still showed a familiar madness, they were obviously different from those that he had faced in the past. This was a neat army. My king above, we might be in trouble this time. The blindfolded young man's face twitched. He could not help but smile bitterly. Then, he took out a stone engraved with scarlet runes and said, "Buddy, we are in serious trouble here. Perhaps serious trouble. When will you guys arrive?" And Yuanxing, who was far away in the holy city, was stunned. "What is it?" "The middle-level chaotic tide is right in front of us now and—" The blindfolded young man hesitated for a moment as he looked at the cluster of black shrouds in the distance. They had stopped moving after unleashing a huge energy blast. Step by step, they walked towards the node city as if they had nothing to fear. "And they are full of discipline," and Yuanxing was speechless. The blindfolded young man smiled bitterly as he recounted what he had seen. There was no exaggeration at all. On the other end of the communication rune, and Yuanxing fell silent. After a long while, he finally opened his mouth and said, "I've never seen such a chaotic tide in history. I know. There has never been such a weird thing in all of history. Hiss, damn it. They are speeding up their attack. We can still hold the mid-scale chaos tide, but it will be more difficult than before. They are no longer the undisciplined and unorganized lunatics. I have sent the second defense line to reinforce the first defense line. But they are probably not strong enough. We need the power of the rising sun to reinforce." And Yuanxing's voice was cut off. There was a dead silence on the other end of the communication rune, and Yuanxing put away the communication rune. That side should have officially started to fight the chaos tide. Once the two forces that were essentially the same but not exactly the same clashed, the laws and dimensions of that place would be distorted. There would be no way to communicate. From now on, they would not know what was happening at the first defense line. As for the new method of attack that he mentioned, and Yuan turned back to look at Yunhua Planet. Yunhua Planet noticed his gaze and lowered her head. After a moment, she shrugged and looked towards the edge of the spirit condensation continent. Her gaze penetrated the obstruction of space, and soon she saw the scene at the edge of the spirit condensation continent. Huge black clouds squeezed into the barrier of the spirit condensation continent through the blooming small holes. Like a stream, they kept flowing into the interior of the continent and turned into chaotic derivatives with destructive energy. Outside the barrier stood several huge atomized giants that might be tens of thousands of miles tall. Their arms that supported the heavens and the earth were engraved with scarlet energy patterns. They swung their arms like pillars that held up the sky and smashed the barrier, causing them to tremble. Every time they trembled, the cracks would collapse a little. Behind them was an endless black cloud that was condensing energy. When the black cloud compressed the energy to a critical value, it would suddenly explode with a monstrous energy impact. Between the two, the atomized giants should have caused more damage to the barrier. Well, that's what it is. Yun Nuoshing briefly explained what he saw to an Yuan, and Yuan's expression changed instantly. It's something I've never seen before. There's no misty giant in my memory either. It doesn't matter whether the memories are there or not. The only thing that is running over our faces is the reality that is happening right now. Yun Nuoshing yawned. The barrier won't be able to hold on for much longer. Because of the unexpected changes, the time it will take to collapse will be shorter than what I predicted. However, even if the barrier is still there, the 1,000 edges of the chaotic tide have already appeared on the main continent. He could see even more places. From a high vantage point, he could see that the edge of the continent was already filled with black mist. The chaos spawns were coming in from all directions. There were humanoid, beastly, and even ink-like things. All kinds of strange spawns were gathering into tiny streams of water. They were rushing towards the node cities in several directions. Their intention was to flatten those cities in one fell swoop. How should he put it? Looking at those spawns, it felt like he was looking at the abyssal death mist spawns. The only difference was that the former was not as destructive as the latter, and did not have as serious of a pollution. Other than that, the chaos tide looked just like the tide of darkness. He did not believe that the distorted races were not in cahoots with the underworld. The way the distorted races operated was basically the same. The only difference was the energy used. One was the mist of divine destruction, while the other was the distorted energy. By the way, that sun, Yun Nuoshing looked up. She used her hand to cover her face. The golden sun was hanging high up in the sky. Its huge size would inevitably bring an unshakable pressure to everyone. Looking up from below, it was indeed quite thrilling. It would be even more thrilling if it came crashing down. 10 minutes ago, the rising sun no longer needed to devour energy to grow. However, it was still surging as if it was brewing something. It had not reached the point where it could truly stabilize. With such a huge mass of energy, before it stabilized, no one dared to use it for the next step. If the rising sun was accidentally triggered and exploded, the chaos tide would not be able to survive this time. Is there no backup plan? Yun Nuoshing looked at an Yuan and frowned. Even if we continue to wait, it will not be able to stabilize. Huh! And Yuan was stunned for a moment. He shook his head in confusion. Although I am one of the core members of the sacred city, only the king knows about this. We do not know how this thing works, and we do not know where to start. But what do you mean by it cannot be stabilized? That energy is too much. Yun Nuoshing pointed at the scarlet runes on an Yuan's body. Although the energy in your body is controllable, its nature is slightly conflicting with the energy mass formed by the runic circle. It is this conflict that makes it unable to stabilize. In the past, when the chaos tide broke out, there were not so many people here. This time, the chaos tide is unprecedented. Because of this, too many lives have come here. The chaos tide that is injected into it has also increased a lot because of the fixed amount of chaos tide that every life has. Even the rules have become chaotic. In the worst-case scenario, that energy mass will explode. The demons around them were horrified when they heard what Yun Nuoxing said. And Yuan was dumbfounded. Yun Nuoxing's analysis seemed to be very familiar with the rising sun. If an Yuan did not know how his king and the former king looked like, he would have thought that they had sneaked out. Yun Nuoxing looked at the tall tower in the mountains. He saw the old man with a long beard that reached his waist. He looked calm on the surface, but he was panicking inside. Yun Nuoxing could not help but shake his head. That thing was not a secret to him. However, to the old man and the others, even the creator of the runic circle would not be able to understand the situation. After all, they could not use the power of the rules. It was already impressive enough that they could create such a circle to extend the life of this world indefinitely. However, they did not expect that something would happen in this situation. Yun Nuoxing slowly reached out his hand and pointed at the golden sun. Although the fireworks are beautiful, it would not be fun if we still have to fight after the fireworks. You just have to operate it properly. Then, let me seriously slack off. Chapter 1395. The powerful storm would destroy everything it came into contact with. When the storm passed, it would only leave behind scorched earth and ruins, leaving behind more despair and disillusionment. He could not remember when it happened. Even the scenes, people, and other things in his memory had been blurred. Only this sentence lingered in his soul. The tide of chaos, or also known as the storm of chaos, was such a thing. It would appear every few years like a convulsion and turn their real world into a mess. Then, it would leave arrogantly, leaving behind a devastated world. Destruction, destruction, and rebirth happened again and again on the spirit-gathering continent. It was said that when the world was created, there was only one main continent. The hundreds of thousands of islands in the inner circle, middle circle, and outer circle were just fragments thrown away from the main continent after being destroyed by the tide of chaos. They were evidence. Such things happened again and again. Sometimes he did not know why the world existed and why they existed. Seeking meaning was something that every intelligent being would do. Although this phrase appeared more often in the mind of those who had nothing better to do, he had no idea what the meaning of their existence and the world was. He could not figure it out, and sometimes he did not want to figure it out. Living in a muddle was much easier than thinking about the meaning of this world. However, he was a being at the peak of the divine realm, a powerful being that should have stood in the world unrestrained. How could he not think about this matter that concerned himself and the world? But he really did not understand why this was happening. Could it be that this was the meaning of the world's existence? Sir, please wake up. It's not time to fall yet. It's still too early. The clamor in his ears brought back his gradually sinking consciousness. The blindfolded young man opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of hot blood. The cold and smelly wind that lingered around him made him feel like his nose was going to rot just by taking a breath. He opened his eyes and saw that the soldier was shaking his shoulder with all his might. His consciousness seemed to have drifted to a faraway place. He saw countless lives wandering in a vast sea. The blindfolded youth let out a sigh. He remembered what happened just now. The transmission was cut off by the distorted energy around him. Since then, the tide of chaos had launched countless attacks like a downpour. To cut off and destroy the power of chaos, they could only let the energy rush out of the barrier and fight against the chaos spawns. However, the chaos spawns' attacks were like an entire ocean crashing down on them. Their energy could not escape at all. In the end, they could only charge out of the barrier and charge into the army of chaos spawns. They had charged out dozens of times and fought a battle of life and death for more than 2 hours. They had suffered heavy losses. Even if they were prepared, even if they tore down the city, it was still not enough. Those preparations were not enough. Middle grade. What bullshit. middle grade. The thick fog obscured his eyes. What was hidden under that was an army as large as an ocean. It was unknown how many times more powerful they were. It reminded him of the last few desperate battles during the last tide of chaos. That day seemed to have been the same as well. However, the barrier had not been broken. Just the number of chaos spawns that had surged in through the cracks was already so great. Tisich, the blindfolded youth, clenched his teeth and pulled out the crimson spear that was stuck in his shoulder. He used the same chaotic energy to dispel the uncontrollable chaos energy. Then, he grabbed a broken weapon from the ground and stood up. First team, second team, third team, fourth team, fifth team. Is there anyone still standing? On the city walls, the remaining 100 or so soldiers who were holding up the barrier turned around abruptly. Their armor clanked as they spoke in unison. "Sir, we are with you." The blindfolded youth smiled bitterly. There were only 100 or so soldiers left. It was not even enough for 1/5 of a team. He looked at the battlefield. His vision was filled with shattered crimson energy flames. The energy storm outside had already covered the sky and the land outside the node city and the barrier. There might have been an abyss-like ravine on the ground. Even if the energy storm had stopped, he would not be able to recognize what was outside the city. "Soldier, report the status of the node barrier." The soldier closest to him replied loudly. "The first defense line's node barrier is already half damaged. Based on the power we are facing, we can speculate that the chaos tide in the other directions is of the same scale. Once the node barrier collapsed, it would completely disintegrate. However, at the same time, there would not be a small hole in it. As long as the barrier did not reach its limit, it would not collapse. In other words, there was no such thing as breaking the surface with a single point. Based on the power of the chaos tide outside, it would not be able to destroy half of the first defense line's node barrier so quickly. The only possibility was that the forces in the other directions were similar to this one. A few similar chaos tides would be able to cause such damage to the barrier. The blindfolded youth could not help but look at the sky. The spirit condensation continent's barrier was still there. However, the first defense line would not be able to hold on for much longer. If they held on, they might be able to hold on for a little longer. In the end, they might not be able to escape death. This is probably the shortest time the first defense line has held on. The blindfolded youth sighed softly. Suddenly, he waved at the last soldier in the node city. "Sit down. Rest here. You have 10 minutes to rest and reorganize." Boom. The soldiers who were guarding the barrier did not say a word. After a short rest, they immediately entered a state of cultivation to recover. They did not ask why, nor did they question. They just followed the order. The blindfolded young man walked forward and reached out his hand to touch the irregular first node barrier outside the city wall. This would be the umpteenth time he had seen it shatter. Every inch of the city wall of this node city was flowing with powerful energy. The runes emitted dazzling radiance, strengthening the defense of the node barrier. Taking a step forward and crossing this layer of barrier, the outside was hell filled with endless chaos and death. Many of the people he led were drowned in the tide of chaos. Behind him, it was only a place of temporary peace. It would not be safe forever because the barrier in front of him would not stand forever. Bang! Suddenly, there was a huge vibration in front of him. His hand that was touching the barrier was shaken off by the force. He could not help but look up. Behind the scarlet energy flames, there was a giant monster that was thousands of feet tall. Its eyes were not far away from him. He could see that the giant was waving its huge arm and punching the node barrier. There was a huge vibration. The monster's arm was shattered. They did not feel pain. They were not made of flesh and blood. They did not have high intelligence. Their minds were only filled with destruction and destruction. They did not even know the concept of death. This kind of suicidal attack would deplete the defensive power of the barrier even faster. Meanwhile, the giant would recover quickly because of the constant bombardment of the same source of energy. The arm that had just been shattered into energy would be fully recovered in the next wave. Then, it punched again. Bang! A golden energy attack landed heavily on the giant's chest. The 1,000-feet-tall figure was immediately sent flying. The blindfolded youth's eyes were wide open. The cloth covering his eyes was burned to ashes by the golden flames. What was exposed was a pair of hollow eyes. There were no eyeballs. His eye sockets were sunken, and only 2 balls of golden flames were burning. After the giant got up, it charged toward him. When it was about to crash into the node barrier outside the city wall, the blindfolded youth stretched out his right hand and put 2 fingers together. A wisp of golden light flickered. It was like a sword was chopped down in front of him. The giant's body was instantly torn into 2 by the energy that contained a faint divine power. It was then burned into energy particles. However, its huge body was not burned into ashes in time. It still crashed into the node barrier with a great amount of energy. Soon after, more energy attacks filled the gap and landed on the node barrier. Every attack was equivalent to an all-out attack of a late god-level expert. Their attacks ranged from the early-stage late god-level experts to those at the peak of the heavenly god stage. They rained down on the node barrier. The node barrier, which was already damaged beyond recognition, became even more distorted. Buzz! The barrier, which was already riddled with holes, suddenly got a chance to breathe. A huge golden energy barrier suddenly enveloped the front of the node city. It was the power of the blindfolded youth. When the chaotic energy that contained uncontrollable energy came into contact with the golden barrier, it was like lava falling into the sea. It stopped moving after emitting a faint heat. Small ripples appeared on the surface of the golden barrier. The barrier's color also darkened. It turned from gold to scarlet. It darkened bit by bit. Even its light dimmed. "Go back!" The blindfolded young man roared angrily. He slammed his hands into the space in front of him, and the huge golden barrier suddenly moved forward slowly. It was like a city wall that was constantly moving forward. A giant that was thousands of feet tall suddenly walked out from the army of chaotic tide. It reached out its hand to touch the golden barrier, but the moment its hand touched the barrier, it disappeared without a trace. There was no resistance at all. It was as if the chaotic energy had been restrained by something and melted away. After the golden barrier swallowed the thousands of feet tall monster, the entire wall of the barrier turned a deep dark gold. Scarlet energy patterns appeared on the barrier. The chaotic energy that was controllable and uncontrollable was moving rapidly within the barrier. The 2 types of energy collided with each other and fused together. However, they also washed away their respective characteristics and became pure energy. Then, they became a dark gold crystal that solidified at its current position. Upon closer inspection, the barrier in front of them had become a huge crystal. After it had swallowed more chaotic energy than it could handle, there was an earth-shattering boom. A sacred golden light suddenly bloomed in front of them. The huge energy wave swept the chaotic minions into it. The smaller minions further away were blown far away by the energy storm like kite. If it was before, this attack should have been able to relieve a lot of pressure. The blindfolded young man wiped away the sweat on his forehead, and the blood on his palm instantly smeared his face. He had charged and broken through the enemy lines dozens of times just now. Apart from the huge wound on his shoulder, he could not remember any other wounds. Every time he wiped his face, there would be a bloody scar. He looked back at the soldiers who were sitting cross-legged and resting urgently and let out a heavy sigh. The sacred energy storm lasted for a while before it began to dissipate rapidly. At the edge of the storm, he could faintly see something curved in an arc. An ominous feeling rose in his heart. After the storm was violently torn apart, he could clearly see it. It was a huge energy barrier. It was scarlet red and filled with uncontrollable chaotic energy. Even though he had expected it, he could not help but smile bitterly. I really have never seen this before. Behind the huge chaotic energy barrier, suddenly two colossal giants walked forward with earth-shattering footsteps. When they arrived in front of the Node City, the blindfolded youth quickly came back to his senses. His two fingers together surged with even more powerful energy. He abruptly turned around, and with the energy sword in his hand, he drew a huge semicircle across the bodies of the two giants. A golden mark flashed across the bodies of the two giants. The two giants were cut into two halves at the waist. Their broken bodies turned into a huge scarlet energy cloud and blasted towards the Node City below. From his point of view, it looked like a meteor crashing down. Bang! Bang! Two huge roars of destruction bloomed in front of him. It was so loud that his ears were buzzing. The tremor had not ended yet. From the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of the energy impact that came crashing down like raindrop. The blindfolded youth breathed heavily. He felt as if his entire body was on fire. All kinds of energy were constantly condensing and flowing away. He was not very good at controlling this energy. Every time he used it, he felt a burning sensation in his body. It was as if his body was going to burn from the inside out. Using all his strength, his left hand pressed down on his trembling right hand. His fingernails dug into his flesh. The blindfolded youth sighed and then shouted, "Get up!" The remaining 100 or so soldiers suddenly stopped resting and stood up. Their armor that was stained with the blood of their comrades looked ferocious under the light of the chaotic energy. His gaze swept across everyone. The golden flames in his eyes burned even brighter. He knew that this was the last round. Once he left, he would never have the chance to return to this city wall. As for what would happen next, he did not care. In this last moment, he could only pray that the spirit-gathering continent could survive this calamity. The blindfolded youth took out bottles of golden runes from a space array device. He distributed them to the last 100 or so soldiers in front of him. They poured the potion into their mouths and casually swallowed it. The energy contained in the potion made the scarlet runes on their bodies shine even brighter. The pain on their bodies gradually disappeared. It was not known if their injuries had healed or if they could no longer feel pain. Everyone threw the bottles onto the city wall and looked down. Their bodies, shoulders, arms, and legs were suddenly emitting scarlet red energy that looked like flames. On the other hand, their auras, which were originally stable chaotic energy, were now on the verge of going out of control. Even their bodies had grown parts that were similar to the chaotic manifestation. The blindfolded youth's body was emitting golden flames and scarlet energy. He looked as if he had crawled out of hell. He stood at the front of the city wall. Every step he took would cause him to be attacked endlessly. His vision pierced through the energy flames and saw the enemy. He saw the destroyed land and looked at the target he had chosen. He suddenly raised his right hand and was about to swing it down. But suddenly, he felt that the crazy energy in his body suddenly disappeared like a ebbing tide. The blindfolded youth was stunned. He looked at the golden flames and scarlet energy on his body retreating. He turned around and saw the scarlet light on the soldiers disappearing. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly felt a burst of joy in his heart. He looked up and saw a brilliant light in the distance. It was a golden ball, just like the sun rising from the east. Boom, boom, unlike the explosion of chaotic energy, the rumbling sound came from the distance in front of him. Under the illumination of the rising sun, he could see that there was a huge shadow cast on the land. Countless huge demons had gathered into a boundless sea of demons, and they were approaching them. At the sight of the golden tide and the human fighters in the sea of beasts, those who were going to fight to the death with their commanding officer felt that their strength and power could support a piece of heaven and earth. At the sight of the golden tide and the human fighters in the sea of beasts, They felt that they could support a piece of heaven and earth. These guys are finally here. The blindfolded youth let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at the tide rolling towards them, he knew that his mission was completed. He subconsciously looked up. However, as soon as he looked up, a figure landed beside him. The figure was holding a piece of black blindfold and pressing it on his eyes. As he tied it, he hurriedly said, "We're here. Sorry we're late." Looking at Yuan's anxious and relieved face, the blindfolded youth shrugged. "It's fine. If you came a minute later, I would have led my men and charged out. Oh, don't get too excited. You're here now. The rising sun has also suppressed the effects of the secret medicine. As for the situation in front of us, well, you've seen it. The first node's barrier has been damaged by more than 60%. The energy tower used to strengthen the barrier was quite useful in the early stages. Until the chaotic tide's level exceeded the intermediate level, reached the current level, it almost instantly became useless. Anyway, it's just a test subject." And Yuan breathed a sigh of relief and helplessly shook his head. "You guys retreat and recover your strength. We'll take over for now." The blindfolded young man adjusted his blindfold, shrugged, and stepped back to the side. With their current state, a group of injured people, and him overdrafting his strength, rushing forward in such a state would be too boring. It would be better for them to take a rest and reorganize their strength so that they could continue to charge after a while. After all, he glanced at the world that had become a lot livelier. Countless gigantic birds and beasts were flying past before his eyes. They were either carrying humans or beasts. After charging through the node's barrier, they came crashing down like a mountain. Then, like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep, they began a one-sided battle in another sense. They probably could not interfere now. Yuan and the others followed closely behind Yuan and arrived at the node city. Standing at the edge of the city wall and watching the one-sided battle erupting before them, his cheeks could not help but twitch a few times. He turned to look at the golden rising sun that hung in the sky like a moon. He only felt a sense of awkwardness, and a sense of disappointment welled up in his heart. The rising sun had an extremely powerful auxiliary function. In addition to what was mentioned earlier, when it officially rose, it could also use its power to teleport to the place covered by its light. There was no delay, and there was no limit to the number of people who could teleport. However, it was fine that they could not use the power of the rules, but they could not even use the teleportation function of the rising sun. He really wanted to grab the beard of the sage-like king and scold him. "Are you guys stupid?" Oh, so there were teleportation portals between the main continent and the archipelago, and they were even the ones who created them. In the end, they did not realize that the rising sun had the function of teleportation. They were worried that it would be too late if they rushed over when the rising sun was fully activated. So, after some discussion, a group of people and beasts rushed out from the holy city in all directions to the first line of defense to provide support. They had almost reached their destination. Now that the rising sun had risen, he immediately discovered this hidden function of the rising sun. Then they ran over. "Hey, this is so infuriating." Chapter 1397. The battle on the Spirit Condensation Continent had been a battle of life and death from the very beginning. After experiencing a peak confrontation that was so violent that it almost destroyed the heavens and earth, the battle gradually stabilized. In the violent and intense peak confrontation, the enemy's resistance was very tenacious. This time, they had gathered all their forces, but they did not expect to face an even more violent resistance. But it did not matter. The outcome of this battle was destined. It did not take much effort, and with the flow of time, the continent would be covered in red and black at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not long ago, it saw the first layer of the turtle shell shattering, and the aftermath of the shattering destroyed most of the combat forces in front of it. But that did not matter. While those guys retreated to the second line of defense, they could replenish their forces during the time they pushed forward. It stood on the wall of the ancient node city and watched as its brethren surged past like a tide. The sky above the ancient city was filled with black shadows, and if it fell into a muddy swamp, the overly dense energy would purify the city. Time was precious, and it wanted to sit on the wall and rest for a while before the city was completely purified, and watch its clumsy and dull brethren move forward. It was special, obviously, but as to what was special, it could not say. From a different perspective, anyone who fell into such an environment would have the same feeling, surrounded by beings that were almost identical to themselves and had the same source of energy, but all of them were as dull as puppets, and would not even turn their heads when it tried to fiddle with them. To say that it was a rational individual, well, it did not seem to make much difference whether it was rational or not. There were trillions of brethren around it, and it was the only one with spiritual intelligence, so what could it do? To say that it had supreme power like a king or something, they were unified under the command of a voice, and now they were carrying out their mission. That voice had completely disappeared after giving out what seemed to be the last command, and intuition told it that the voice would not appear again. But even so, it was just a nameless soldier that had inexplicably gained sentience. It did not have the authority to command, but it had the additional ability to move freely. Even if it left the formation without permission, no one would care about it. It was not interested in the destruction of the battlefield. Instead, it preferred the colorful things. Unlike the pitch-black residence, it was either black or red. Looking at it made its eyes red and black. Oh, its eyes were red in the first place. It knew that it had some terrible ideas, and was looking forward to something that was not allowed. Needless to say, it knew that its compatriots were completely different from those who did not know anything but had spiritual intelligence. Otherwise, they would not have been beaten to the point that their eyeballs popped out. Therefore, it was just a casual thought and did not pay much attention to it. It did not want to be killed as soon as it showed up. Sitting on the city wall and swinging its legs, it looked at its compatriots who had entered the spirit-gathering continent and were sent to other locations. It suddenly felt a little bored. It could not remember how many times it had received such orders to take down the continent, and the intelligent fellows behind it were sending out little by little like idiots. If they had attacked with full force like today, the enemy would not have been able to stop them even if there were dozens of times more of them. It did not understand why they had to send out troops bit by bit before, and now decided to do it all at once. There was a rumble of destruction in the distance. The sky had long been illuminated by the energy flares, and the sound only reached here a little later. It swung its legs and looked at the place where the energy burst out. That should be the place where its brethren had come into contact with the second barrier. However, it could also be that they were ambushed halfway, just like what happened just now. If it had not evaded in time, it might have died. Come to think of it, it had never sensed the presence of that energy before. It felt a little out of place, different from this place, different from them, and different from them. Although it was well and perfectly concealed, in its perception, the two were not the same. How could a giant be compared to a human? It even felt that the energy had been hidden all along, hiding a certain side that might be even more terrifying than its brethren. It did not know why it had such a thought, but it still kept that feeling in mind. Boom! It lowered its head and saw that the ancient city had completely sunk into the quagmire. It was dragged into the endless abyss by the black quagmire that was swimming with scarlet energy. It watched as the darkness engulfed the entire city bit by bit, swallowing the city walls. When the darkness had spread to its surroundings, it slowly stood up. After thinking for a moment, it picked up a brick that was engraved with beautiful patterns and put it away. After that, it lightly leaped onto the body of a big man that was walking slowly beside it. Standing at a height, it could see further. However, this 10,000-mile tall man was walking too slowly. It had to pause for half a day for every step it took. It was so slow that it could only hang at the back of the team. Every step it took shook the earth and the mountains. It had even hit the man's jaw a few thousand times, trying to urge him to walk faster. In the end, that part of his jaw was crooked, but the man still ignored it. He only cared about his own pace, walking step by step. By the time it reached its destination, the war would have already ended. A little impatiently, it jumped down from the big guy and stepped on the head of a 10,000 feet tall giant. Then, it rode the wind and slowly moved forward. Along the way, the whole army seemed to have encountered many traps left by the enemy. At first, it could see that the traps were well hidden, but later on, they simply laid the traps on the ground. It was really bullying its compatriots that did not know how to hide. It was also because of this that it was ambushed several times along the way. After the army crossed the border, there were still many traps left behind, and a few of them even almost caught it. Knowing that its skin was thin and its health was weak, it tried its best to shrink back, but it still almost capsized. It took a look behind it and simply jumped back a little, but there were also many traps hidden in the space. It accidentally triggered a few of them and almost tore it into pieces. The black fog was surging all over its body, and it felt uncomfortable. After thinking about it, it returned to the big man. It would not be a problem if it hid in the big man's body. It turned out that it was indeed so. The journey was indeed smooth, and they did not encounter any inexplicable destructive forces. However, when they reached the second barrier, this city, which was bigger than the first one, was already empty, leaving behind many broken pieces. There were no corpses, which was normal. The enemy had taken away the corpses of their own people, except for those who were drowned in the waves of its compatriots. It sat silently on the wall, watching the city disappear under the power of its compatriots. It picked up a piece of debris engraved with scarlet runes and continued to move forward with the big man. If there were no accidents, when it reached the third line of defense, it should see the same scene. Then it would pick up a piece of debris and preserve it so that it would not be eroded by their energy. Then it would go to the fourth line of defense, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, until it was completely destroyed. Completely destroyed the colorful world. Then what? It did not know. It did not know. It did not know why it was destroyed. It did not know what was left after the destruction. It did not know the meaning of all this. The only thing it knew was that the colorful world was about to disappear. It only felt a little regretful. The surrounding air was filled with a nauseating, distorted presence. The chaotic storm blew the distorted energy into the depths of the defensive line. Even though they had already retreated to the fourth line of defense, the situation was not alleviated. They retreated as they fought, and the node barrier retreated at an unprecedented speed. Even with the secret assistance of Yun Nuoxing, Lord Qing, and so on, even though they had suppressed their cultivation to the level of reciprocity and were unable to use their full strength. Yep, even with these restrictions, they were still powerful reciprocity gods. Even so, they were still unable to stop the defensive line from retreating. However, even under these circumstances, the morale of the people in the surroundings was still high. It seemed like they were forcing their morale to be high, but not a single one of them showed any signs of mental breakdown. It was just like what he had heard at the beginning. No matter what happened, they would still charge towards the chaotic storm with high morale. As expected, the battle against the chaotic tide had turned into a terrible situation of fighting and retreating at the same time. The only good thing was that no one was crying in despair. Judging from this point, he felt that this world was already very, very, very good. If it were someone from another world, they would have been crying and crying when they saw their own territory being wiped out like dry weeds and smashed rotten wood without any hope of survival. In this battle of retreating, Yuan and the various experts had already turned all their experiences into explosions behind them. The effects were quite good. Every new and old battle tactic achieved good result. Although the strange Taoist cultivators had gained discipline for some reason, it did not change the fact that they were still idiots. Their minds were only filled with destruction and distorted energy. They used these tactics over and over again, and they would be able to kill a sizable number of enemies every time. They would achieve impressive results every time, but the number of enemies was still very sizable. The scale of the battle was too great. Even Yun Nuoxing and the others had to admit that if they wanted to kill such a large number of enemies without destroying the world, they would have to fight until their hands or brains cramped. It's not a good idea to keep fighting and retreating like this. All the backup energy and all the materials will be exhausted one day. On the energy tower of the 4th node city, east of the 4th node barrier, Yun Nuoxing and the others listened to an Yuan sorting out the battle reports of the past few days. Their faces were sad and gloomy. This time we have used all our strength and means. If it was the last battle of the chaotic tide, it would have ended by now. But this time, he paused and looked up at Yun Nuoxing. Everyone also looked at Yun Nuoxing. Only he could see the situation outside without any hindrance. Seeing that, Yun Nuoxing said the same words in the same tone and at the same speed, endless. Everyone smiled bitterly. This time, the little monkey really scratched his head. We kill fast, but the enemies recover fast. Just like the ones I killed today. At least 10 million of them? But it did not take long for them to recover. In the face of such numbers, the suppression effect of the rising sun is almost zero. He smiled bitterly. After plucking out a strand of monkey hair, he was stunned for a moment. I'm at my wit's end. I'm bald. The chaotic tide is a monster that is inflexible and inflexible. Their various means are very effective. Although our resources will be exhausted, it is not the time yet. As the defense line tightens, our strength will become more and more concentrated. To put it bluntly, we are still not strong enough. There is no way to continuously cause enough damage to the enemy to affect the army. And Yuan smiled bitterly. Oh, you're talking nonsense. The WRM turned around helplessly. He lowered his head and counted the remaining hair on the little monkey's bald head. We don't have the means to attack an entire area, nor do we have the means to suppress the enemy. As time goes by, we are at a disadvantage. It's normal for us to be in such a passive situation. Speaking of means to attack with enough power, the blindfolded young man suddenly raised his head and looked at Yun Nuoxing. Everyone looked at Yun Nuoxing as well. Every time a battle began, he would be the one to launch the first attack. That scene of destruction was deeply imprinted in the hearts of all living beings. In terms of attack power, no one here could compare with him. In this dark moment, he was like a lamp, guiding the way forward and sprinkling a trace of hope. What he did not know was that the morale of the people was still maintained at this level because of him. Feeling that everyone was looking at him expectantly, Yun Nuoxing was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and said, I do have some means to attack. If the range is large enough and the power is strong enough, I can launch an attack from here to the edge of the east and then sweep across the area in a fan-shaped attack. Everyone imagined that kind of attack. After a little calculation, they shuddered violently. Perhaps it could wipe out 1/10 of the chaotic tide in one fell swoop? But, Yun Nuoxing said heavily, reminding everyone to come back to their senses. From now on, that area will be completely destroyed. It won't be completely destroyed. It might not be able to return to normal land for tens of millions of years. After thinking about it carefully, everyone and the demons broke out in cold sweat. They quickly shook their heads and laughed dryly. Forget about it. Although it would not hurt the enemy by 1,000, it would still destroy the area. If there was no future, then it would be a fight to the death. However, everything was uncertain now. Everyone had that kind of hope. What if they could withstand the attack and the war was over? Then they would still have to survive on this land. They couldn't just burn everything down and then stop living, right? Well, it seems that you all understand. Yun Nuoxing shrugged when she saw the expressions of everyone and the demons changing. Some of my ultimate moves exist for destruction. What it destroys is all matter. If I can avoid using them, I would try my best not to. Yunjun is right. That can only be used as a last resort. Unless we are determined that we don't need to live in the future, or we are about to lose and want to die together. And Yuanxing said with a bitter smile, wiping away his sweat. The many life forms in the energy towers nodded in agreement. The future seemed bleak, but there was still a glimmer of hope. They did not forget what Yun Nuoxing had said yesterday. A 122 chance of victory. How about it? Are you desperate? No, it was actually enough. At the very least, it proved that they had exhausted all their means and used all their strength to seek the only victory from the 122. In other words, there was still hope. Although it was so small that it was almost invisible, there were indeed traces of golden flames in the darkness. Just when everyone was about to say something, Yun Nuoxing suddenly stood up and smiled at everyone. It's time to relax, my friends. Everyone's expression quickly turned cold and serious. They squeezed their way out of the energy towers and quickly came to the top of the city wall. Then, they saw a deep and dark darkness on the horizon. At the same time, a loud voice suddenly echoed throughout the Node City. The tide of chaos has been detected within sight. Entering attack range. Chaos, sky curtain. At the same time that the loud voice was heard, everyone was stunned. They saw the Lord known as the Light of Hope, standing on the city wall. A dark red light flashed on his body. Then, in the distance, a dark red curtain of light suddenly appeared on the ground. It stretched to the left and right of the horizon like a fluttering colorful dress. It was very beautiful but also very deadly. When the spawns of chaos tried to force their way through the chaos, sky curtain, a layer of dark red flames surrounded them. The spawns of chaos that were not strong enough were directly burned to ashes. Those that were strong enough could endure until the flames disappeared, and their auras withered and their energy levels dropped to the lowest possible level. The chaos, sky curtain can last for about 4 hours. In these 4 hours, there won't be too many or too strong spawns of chaos coming. If you have any ideas, you can do it now. Yun Nuoxing turned around and said to all the life in the Node City. The latter and many other life forms responded with an earth-shattering roar. Still as domineering as ever, the blindfolded young man could not help but mutter. Anyway, the morale of the entire city had risen again. Then, a large group of life forms poured out of the Node City like a tidal wave. They dug holes on the ground and space far ahead. They dug holes with all their might and started to cause trouble. Yun Nuoxing glanced at them and shook his head helplessly. He would just let them be. His vision, with the help of the chaos in the sky, looked further away. He saw the second node barrier that had been abandoned long ago. He saw the 10,000-mile-long giants, and behind them, there were more endless chaos spawns. There seemed to be more chaos spawns coming in from the edge of the land. There was no end to it. Suddenly, his eyes were attracted by something. He blinked and shook his head. He found the huge beings that he saw just now. On one of the huge beings, he saw a spawn with obvious scarlet energy lines all over its body sitting on the shoulder of another huge being. It was in a thinker's pose as it dozed off. At that moment, he felt that his brain was not working properly. Firstly, that thing looked the same as the other spawns, but the patterns were different. Secondly, that thing was in a pose. Thirdly, he could not figure it out. That thing has mutated, right? Yun Nuoxing could not help but say. His words attracted the attention of Jing Yuanji, Cu, and the others. The girls came over to borrow his eyes. Then, they all saw the spawn of chaos that was dozing off in a thinker's pose. Instantly they felt sick, little star. Siyu tugged at Yun Nuoxing's arm and suddenly said, I think that thing might have sentience. Why? Siyu didn't say anything and just pointed to the front. Everyone continued to look forward and saw that strange derivative standing on the giant's shoulder, doing forward somersaults, back somersaults, front and back somersaults, turning here and there. Then, it even performed a set of fist techniques from an unknown world. Everyone was speechless. Yun Nuoxing scratched his cheek. He did not know what to say. Little star, do you want to catch it? Siyu asked with a smile. Don't try to catch anything fun at home. There are enough weird things at home. Yun Nuoxing rolled his eyes. Chapter 1398. Boom! The explosion of energy shook the heavens and the earth, causing the sky to collide with the earth. Countless minions of chaos carrying black mist surged on the earth, spilling darkness into every corner. The life force of the giant beasts and the human race worked together, repeatedly charging and killing in the chaotic tide, pushing back the surging darkness. Amidst the earth-shattering battle cries, they were stained with the blood of their own people, and their bodies were also stained with the enemy's energy. Again and again, powerful energy blasts, carrying with them endless destructive power, fought until the sky darkened and the earth cracked. Every powerful energy blast would cause the black mist in an area to dissipate. The giant dragons spread their wings and soared under the dusky sky, each of their destructive dragon breaths landing on the earth, burning a large piece of empty land. When they attacked the enemy, they would also be wary of attacks from the sky or the ground. Boom! The little monkey had already transformed into a 10,000 feet tall gorilla. With a roar, it raised both of its hands high and smashed the ground. The earth within a 10,000-mile radius rumbled, and huge spikes protruded from the ground, only stopping when they were 1,000 feet above the ground. The spikes even spread along with the trembling ground all the way to the depths of the enemy army, annihilating tens of thousands of minions of chaos. The little monkey waved its hands and slapped away the energy blasts that were aimed at it from all directions. Its huge body suddenly leaped into the air and landed among the minions of chaos with the force of Mount Tai. Countless minions were trampled into a puddle of mud, and countless minions protruded from the ground due to the tremors. Every time it leaped, it would cause a forest of spikes to rise, destroying countless minions with each area as a unit. At the same time, its huge body was also being attacked every moment. If it was not for the support of the energy of the rising sun, it would have collapsed long ago. The pressure on me has increased by 4 times. The little monkey smashed a large piece of land with its fist, flattening all the minions of chaos. It turned around and roared at everyone, "Retreat to the next node city. There are not enough spots left. Old dragon, we need the power of the sky." Everyone and the demonic beasts began to retreat. When they retreated, they did not expose their backs and blindly retreat. Instead, they fought as they retreated. When they were at a safe distance, they turned around and retreated. The retreat at the rear was even slower. The dragons in the sky poured down huge energy light pillars on the ground, sweeping across and clearing out areas. One of the black dragons heard the little monkey's words and let out a dragon roar. Then, a runic array that covered an area of 1,000,000 miles suddenly appeared in the sky. Huge energy light pillars that were hundreds of meters long fell from the sky with scorching, destructive energy. When the energy light pillars landed on the ground, they exploded, turning into a continuous sea of fire that divided the ground into countless areas, blocking the advance of the chaotic tide and creating an opportunity for everyone to retreat with peace of mind. The little monkey slapped away all the minions within a radius of 100 miles around his arms, then slammed his hands into the ground, grabbing 2 pieces of rocks and throwing them far away. After that, he turned back into his little monkey form with a bang and leaped into the air. The black dragon swooped down and grabbed him with its claws, then pulled him back. It hung in the air and looked back. It was almost done retreating. It was part of the group that brought up the rear. It should be the last few people. Every time it retreated and hung in the air, it could see the scene in front of it, the endless black tide, the chaotic tide. How long has it been since the battle began? It did not have an exact number in its mind, but the strange and powerful human seemed to have an idea. However, although it did not know how much time had passed, the scene in front of it seemed like it would never change. The chaotic tide was still the chaotic tide, eroding the land from all directions like an ocean, swallowing everything in the world. The little monkey could not help but look in front of it. The golden sun was getting bigger and bigger. It was only a small ball at the beginning of the battle, but now it could be seen faintly. It hung in the sky, unusually bright. This meant that they had retreated a long distance. They could see the rising sun slowly growing bigger. Perhaps it would not be long before they could see the area where the holy city was. One advantage was that the closer they were to the rising sun, the stronger the power they could receive. But even so, they could not withstand the endless chaotic tide. They were still in a very dangerous situation. Old dragon, which node barrier did we just leave? It could not help but ask in a low voice. The 29th node, my brother. The black dragon let out a low, thunderous sound. It could not help but turn around to take a look. Its golden eyes reflected the dark tide, and its vertical slits could not help but shrink slightly. It recalled every time the military advisor would say, endless. Yes, endless. A long time had passed, but they still did not see any signs of the chaotic tide subsiding. The node barriers were retreating at an unprecedented speed. Even with the military counselor's power, they could not withstand the chaotic tide of this level. A quarter of the main continent has fallen, the little monkey said faintly. There are not many escape routes left. Send some of our forces to the inner node cities. Try to leave as many energy traps as possible between those areas. It's useless. We started this plan after the 15th node city was destroyed. From the 18th node barrier until now, we've been fully prepared every time. We've destroyed enough of the spawns of chaos each time, but their attack has never weakened. Yes, it had never weakened. They had been fighting for so long. They had endless power. And this time, their opponents also seemed to have endless energy. The number of chaos spawns that they had destroyed, the number of chaos spawns that the entire continent had destroyed could be counted in the units of trillions. But the chaotic tide before them was still as fierce as ever. They were monsters without the concept of life and death. They did not feel pain or fear. Only the command in their minds to destroy everything drove them forward. They kept pushing forward until the entire spirit-gathering continent was destroyed. In the 30th node city, Yun Nuoshing stood on the high city walls. He used the power of the rising sun to guide the retreating lifeforms into the node city. The vitality circle that he had set up in the city spun rapidly. The rich life force could wipe away the pain and fatigue of all lifeforms. As long as the circle did not collapse and was not destroyed in one go, it would come back to life. But the influence of the chaotic energies on the rules was too severe. He tried to let the little monkey and the others bring the circle into battle, but it did not last 5 minutes on the battlefield because the energies there were too distorted and disintegrated. If he did not use enough power of the rules, that was the best he could do. Yun Nuoshing raised his hand. A huge rune, the rune of this world, appeared in the sky. All energy, light, space, time, and the void in this world collapsed towards that rune, forming a huge dark blue energy cluster that kept expanding. Extremely chaotic and unbalanced energies came from within. The surging energy cluster became an oval-shaped water sphere. It was not round and not stable enough, but since the enemy was something that would shatter at the slightest touch, there was no need to stabilize the energy cluster to the point where it could annihilate some high-tier lifeforms. He only needed to expand the range of the destructive energy. That was why he did not plan to stabilize the energy cluster and instead made it even more unstable. The military advisor is about to do something big. Everyone, take note. Take care of yourselves if you are caught in it. No one knew which unlucky demon shouted at the top of his lungs. Those who had just entered the city, those who were still rushing into the city, or those who were just standing at the side all widened their eyes. They looked at the huge wriggling energy cluster hanging above their heads and felt that they were about to break out in cold sweat. They quickly made way for it. After Yun Nuoxing felt that there were no other life forms blocking the way, he swung his right hand down. Boom! Bang! As soon as the energy left his hand, it exploded with a thunderous sound. A huge energy shockwave shattered the sky. The entire world rumbled because of it. Without control, the many unstable energies in the cluster of energy cluster became even crazier and more uncontrollable. After trembling and shattering the earth and the sky, it rumbled and rolled forward. It was like a huge black hole that kept on devouring everything around it. Those demons who were standing close to it curiously were scared out of their wits. One by one, they jumped down from the city walls. When the black dragon and the little monkey saw the dark blue energy cluster that was thousands of miles wide, they were stunned in midair. They watched as the energy cluster grew bigger and bigger. It brushed past them and slowly accelerated. The speed at which it was moving away and the speed at which it was expanding were perfectly balanced. It was a speed that allowed them to know that it was moving away, but its size in their line of sight did not change at all. In front of everyone's eyes, the huge energy cluster crashed into the chaotic tide. An extremely dazzling flash of light flashed before everyone's eyes. Countless people blinked and then opened their eyes again. They saw a huge destructive energy storm that was hundreds of millions of miles wide formed in an instant. As the white energy cluster expanded explosively, they could see a huge white sun rising from the horizon. It seemed like it could even swallow the world. Boom! The roar of destruction was delayed for a long time before it reached here, followed by a strong aura of destruction. The huge gale made all living beings crawl on the ground, and some humans who couldn't react in time were directly blown away. The magical beast friends at the side hurriedly reached out to grab their human allies who were about to fly away. The black dragon directly retracted its wings and hugged its head with its eyes closed, looking very funny. Under its belly was a little monkey who was almost out of breath and whose face was flushed red from holding his breath. The destructive storm dispersed after around 2 minutes. However, it had been forcefully dispersed. All the life forms, including Yun Nuoxing, were surprised. They raised their heads and opened their eyes. The chaotic tide had been knocked back, so they could not help but feel fortunate. However, Yun Nuoxing did not think the same. His expression was rather strange. Although he had suppressed his power to the level of reciprocity, he had never thought that the chaotic tide would have a way to nullify his power. Strangely, that attack had destroyed countless spawns, and the shockwave of destruction had spread over 1 billion miles, leaving only a giant crater in the ground. Before the destructive energy could unleash a second, third, and fourth shattering impact, the storm had been dealt with. Without the white ball of energy, the scenery in the surroundings became clear once again. Everyone could not help but use various techniques to look at the horizon. They saw 2 10,000-kilometer-tall giants appear in the crater. Their huge bodies radiated with the energy of the world with a single gesture, which surprised all the life forms there. Don't worry. They move very slowly. Even if the barrier around our node collapses, they won't be able to reach this place. They've probably been alarmed by the sudden movement. Yun Nuoxing explained to everyone to make them stop worrying. Moreover, he did not see the person on the giant's shoulder, so he did not know if it was the same giant or if it had been blown away. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief, but they still looked at the 2 giants standing between the heavens and the earth with solemn expressions. Scarlet energy was flowing on the tens of thousands of miles tall body, which seemed to be moving according to some kind of complicated pattern. It seemed to be different from the smaller and bigger ones. They didn't see it at all just now, not at all at the beginning. It suddenly appeared after the military counselor launched a strike. It probably rushed over from the rear of the army to block the attack. With such power, it was not difficult for it to appear in front of them in an instant. However, the two giants paused after dealing with the Tiamat's wrath. It was as if the military advisor had said. They were rather stunned, unable to arrive after the battle. If this continues, it'll be terrible. Yun Nuoshing stretched his body. If this continues, we won't know when we'll have to use our full strength. We'll easily sink this continent. Siyu and Feng Qinghuang sat cross-legged against the city wall. They raised their heads to look at him and yawned loudly. The latter even covered her mouth. The two girls were exhausted. Although they had as much energy as they wanted, it was just as they had been worried at the beginning. No matter how much energy they had, their bodies and souls would still feel tired. Even if he had prepared the vitality array every time, it would still take some time for them to recover. They had been fighting for more than 20 days without sufficient rest. Moreover, they had been fighting under the condition that they had to circulate their energy to the peak. If this continued, not only would these peak heavenly gods not be able to take it, even Yun Nuoshing, who was at the peak of origin, wanted to beat someone up. How could they fight in such a condition? However, there was nothing they could do about it. They were facing a bunch of monsters without flesh and blood. On their side, they were all living creatures. They would feel tired, their hands would tremble, their brains would spasm, and occasionally they would go crazy. They had been fighting like crazy for more than 20 days. Including the rest time, they might not even be able to last for 20 hours. Who could withstand this? I just had a discussion with Monarch Green. With the people in the other positions. Yun Nuoshing looked at an Yuan, who had dark circles under his eyes, and suddenly said, "The 30th node's barrier has been shattered. Retreat to the 32nd node's barrier. From this position all the way to the 32nd node's barrier, there will be all kinds of energy traps set up. It will last for a while. When all of you retreat to that place, just rest. Don't think about anything else, just take a nap. In the middle, there will be people who will buy you some time to rest. Directly give up a node to buy some time to rest." Little Monkey dragged his tired body and walked over. He looked at everyone, the magical beasts who were rushing to take a nap, and the many humans who were resting on the magical beasts. They were lying in piles, looking like a mass grave. He nodded and said, "I agree. In this state, everyone is already very tired. Although the morale hasn't dropped because of you, the number of casualties in the attack and defense of several node barriers has dropped to a certain extent recently. In this case, we really need to take a break. Otherwise, we won't be able to hold on for such a long time." Yun Nuoshing nodded. She waved her hand and took out a stone engraved with runes and threw it to an Yuan. She said, "I said before that Shuri has a teleportation function, but you don't know how to use it. The coordinates of the 32nd node city are engraved here. When you retreat later, activate this and take everyone with you." And Yuan took the stone in a daze and nodded. Then, he slapped himself hard and forced himself to wake up. Hiss. Cough cough. "Yunjun, you went out just now to do this." Yun Nuoshing nodded. "The other nodes have also prepared this. When we retreat, we will retreat together. Since we are retreating as a whole, we will bring up the rear this time. So, we won't have time to activate the teleportation runes. You will do it. Understood." And Yuanxing nodded and kept the teleportation runes. Then, he tilted his head and looked into the distance. The dark shadow of the chaotic tide was much closer. It was almost within attack range. "We have lost many lives along the way. This damned war, when will it be over?" "I don't know." The little monkey shook its head. It jumped onto the brick of the city wall and looked into the distance. It greedily inhaled the rich breath of life in the air, and cleared some of its tiredness. But if we don't fight, the end will never come. Cheer up, human boy. It's not the time to lose hope yet. And Yuan smiled bitterly and turned to look at the 30th node city. How's the preparation of that thing? Yun Nuoshing and the others turned their heads. The node city had been dismantled and replaced with more rune buildings that were used to support the battle. They had seen it before. However, this node city was even more exaggerated. There was only a wall facing the chaotic tide. Behind the wall was empty space. On the empty space, there was a majestic golden hourglass-shaped building. It was 1,000 miles tall and 10,000 miles wide. The hourglass was lying on the ground. On the left and right sides of the hourglass, one side was filled with dark red energy, while the other side was filled with mixed-colored energy. No problem. The blindfolded youth weakly raised his hand and gave a thumbs up. Then, he said to the others with a pale face, "It contains the energy of the military advisor and everyone. The commotion this time will definitely be more exaggerated than the abyssal rift caused by the chaotic tide." Yun Nuoshing's face twitched. This world was always able to surprise him. For example, the rising sun and this thing before him. The former was a large-scale support formation. As for the hourglass before him, it was a trump card. It was a trump card that would bring about great danger if it was opened. The rift caused by the chaotic tide last time was created by this thing. However, they had only used all the energy they could reach last time. This time, they had added his destruction force and the energy of Jing Yuanji and the others. Who knew what level of energy the shockwave would be this time? In the beginning, Yun Nuoshing felt that this world was strangely weak. They had even forced them to face the chaotic tide created by the twisted races. It was basically bullying. However, he no longer felt that way. This world was basically a mutated existence. It had forcefully created so many heaven-defying things with such limited conditions and knowledge. It was no wonder that it could withstand the chaotic tide for tens of millions of years. However, part of the reason was because those people wanted to force a breakthrough to appear in this world. The chaotic tide was essentially no different from the chaotic period of Dao Tian's world. They wanted to use the method of raising insects to force out one or two breakthroughs to reach reciprocity. To them, any method was no problem at all. They did not feel any heartache even if they destroyed a mere experimental product of a world. Little star. Siyu tugged at his sleeve. Yun Nuoshing ended his thoughts and turned his head. The little girl pointed at his feet. He lowered his head and saw that Dao Heaven was leaning against his feet and had fallen into a deep sleep. Yun Nuoshing thought about it. He took out a cloak from his pendant and put it on Dao Tian. Jing Yuanji carefully isolated Dao Tian in a quieter space. She said to the others, "Her attacks completely rely on her mental strength. Even if her mental strength has reached a certain level, it's still too difficult for her to face a battle that lasts for such a long time." Everyone sighed. "Fortunately, we're not using mental strength." Yun Nuoshing also sighed. He also felt a little tired. He remembered that he had not rested properly for many days. He squatted down and stroked Dao Tian's platinum hair. He said softly, "It's almost over." Chapter 1399. Node City 30. Perhaps because it was an important node, the defensive measures set up here were much stronger than the previous ones. All sorts of strange weapons were stacked on the city walls and in the air. Before the massive energy source behind them detonated, it could release powerful energy shockwaves that swept across the battlefield from time to time, clearing out a large area. There were lives being lost every moment on the battlefield. If the spawns of chaos were counted as lives, then the number would be multiplied by 1,000,000 times. Some of the faces that they had seen a few times had fallen in a charge and never stood up again. The laws here were so severely distorted that the dazzling phenomenon of heavenly gods fading away would not happen. Each fallen figure simply dissipated into energy sparks without a sound, attracting no attention at all. From the moment they set foot on the battlefield, they had already abandoned everything about life and death. All that was left was the battle orders that filled their minds. Their bodies were brimming with fighting spirit that drove them to keep moving forward, slashing and bathing in blood. If they did not win or die, they could not retreat, run, or cry. Once any of these thoughts appeared, the entire battlefront would collapse in a chain reaction. Fortunately, after tens of millions of years of conquest, they had gotten used to such things. The will to fight had been engraved into their bones. No matter how bad the situation was or whether they would die in the next second, it no longer mattered. All they had to do was to wave their hands subconsciously. Yun Nuoshing looked up at the energy barrier before her with a wave of her hand, and then turned to look at Siyu, Dao Heaven, and the others who were already a little dispirited. Even if Jing Yuanji had fought innumerable battles with Hui or himself, she was gradually becoming a little out of shape. Even if it was any other heavenly god who had fought continuously in peak form and taught spirit for dozens of days, they would also be tired. But for the entire battle, this was only the beginning. They still had a long time to hold on, and in the end, the tide of chaos could even last a year or two. That was enough time for the tide of chaos to destroy thousands of worlds. I couldn't find any shortcuts. Yun Nuoshing's eyelids drooped slightly as he sighed. These days, he had been trying to find a way to strengthen the power of order or weaken the power of the tide of chaos, but he could not find anything. He had been following and observing the tide of chaos for dozens of days. The tide of chaos was the same as the abyssal death shroud. There was nothing that could be called a weakness, and he could not find any special way to artificially create a weakness, such as a trap or something of the sort. As such, the only way to get rid of the tide of chaos was by brute force. In fact, when he realized that even the forces of this world, who had been fighting the tide of chaos for tens of millions of years, could not find any weakness, he should have looked for another way. In the end, he still had a little bit of hope. Soldier, report the situation of the node barrier. The casualty rate is less than 20%, sir, but Yuanxing gritted his teeth as he looked at the battle below with a pair of dark circles under his eyes. But the pressure on the ground below has increased by several times. Since an hour ago, the force of their advance had been weakening. At first, they were still able to maintain a stalemate, keeping the battle line that symbolized the division between chaos and order at a stable position. However, the battle line would change. The soldiers' stamina, endurance, and the endless energy from the spawn of chaos were all factors. Since an hour ago, the battle line had been slowly retreating until now. Until now, the battle line was approaching the node barrier. Soon, they would be forced to retreat to the defense of the node city. Unlike the sporadic attacks now, when that time comes, the node barrier would have to endure hundreds or thousands of times more pressure than it was now. Even a special defensive barrier like the 30th node barrier could not hold on for too long, and could only hold on for a few hours longer than the previous ones. 5th Squad, return. You have gone too deep into the tide of chaos. Didn't you notice that your own squad members are out of touch with you? 17th Squad has lost combat ability. Return to the node city and await orders. Estimated that you can fight again in an hour. Old dragon, we need the power of the sky. Hurry up and spit some phlegm. I can't hold on any longer. My throat hurts. Wait. At the same time, his ears were also echoing with similar reports and conversations. Those with numbers and teams were all the forces of the human race. Those who roared at the top of their lungs to communicate were mostly the communication between the magical beasts. What surprised him was that the dragon's breath would hurt his throat if he spat out too much. Putting aside the one or two words of joy in the midst of bitterness, most of the news was not good. Even those from Yun Nua planet who did not listen to the news could feel that the situation on the battlefield was worsening. Just like the resistance in front of the first 30 barriers, the further they went, the closer the place of battle was to the node barrier. Even if they retreated every time, they would gather with the forces that were preparing at the back and their strength would be stronger. This situation would not change. Seeing in Yuan and the others looking over, Yun Nuoxing glanced at the edge of the spirit condensation continent. The tide of chaos is still pouring into the main continent, but we haven't seen those special spawns for a while. The first half of his answer was unchanging. Dozens of days had passed since the start of the battle, and the tide of chaos had not slowed down. And Yuan and the others were not surprised to hear this answer. Every time this happened, the blindfolded young man would mutter, "When will this end?" Yun Nuo was silent. The bunch of twisted creatures had been operating in this world for tens of millions of years, and by the time they had used up most of their resources, it should be over. After all, this was the last tide of chaos, and those fellows had left this world, obviously not intending to pay any attention to this place. As for their plan of forcing a breakthrough to appear in this world, Yun Nuo felt that before the breakthrough appeared, this world would be swallowed by the tide of chaos. Moreover, even if a breakthrough did appear in this situation, it was still a question of whether they could survive. The 100 or so heavenly origin gods who had suppressed their powers felt their scalps tingling when facing this number of chaos minions. With the power of this world, unless the entire race was promoted to origin lifeform, there was no way they could survive. Yun Nuoxing knocked the arrow and pointed it diagonally upwards. He glanced at the chaotic tide down below and gently released the arrow. The energy arrow streaked across the sky with a violent buzzing and air-piercing sound, drawing a beautiful arc in the sky. It split into tens of millions of pieces in the sky and fell to the ground like raindrop. It densely bombarded an area and cleared out a vast area of 1,000,000 miles in the back. The explosive attack did not cause much of a commotion, and no one paid any attention to it. The spawns of chaos would not stop their advance just because something happened behind them. Some of the spawns of chaos were as large as demons pushing the front line forward, and there were even situations where tens of thousands of spawns of chaos would fall with every meter they pushed forward. As for the spawns of chaos behind them, once they entered the attack range, they suddenly raised their hands in unison, and streaks of energy blasts and torrents of energy blasted towards the node barrier. They completely ignored the lifeforms of order that were fighting with their brethren, and only had eyes for the node barrier. But in reality, there were still some of the spawns of chaos that were fighting in front of them. When the 30th node barrier was hit for the first time, Yuan's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but sigh. This was the second phase, and the node barrier would be subjected to endless energy blasts until it shattered. The power of chaos has reached us. Release all the energy from the city walls and energy towers. They have entered the attack range. The many tall runic energy towers behind the city walls burst into a dazzling light. Streaks of energy blasted into the sky, and then fell into the tide of chaos as raindrops of light. Each raindrop could cause an energy explosion on the ground, covering an area of about 10 feet. And that was just the power of a single raindrop. Hundreds and thousands of runic energy towers created a rain, and only heaven knew how many raindrops were falling. Now that the battle line had been pushed back to this extent, and after receiving reinforcements from the clumsy, fixed, and unknown things behind them, everyone felt that the pressure on the front line had lessened a little, but it still could not hide the fact that they were still being pushed back into the city. Compared to the previous few defenses, there are too many heavenly god-tier spawns in this tide of chaos. There are even quite a few peak heavenly god-tier spawns. Although their defenses are still weak, they can still launch fatal attacks when they are caught off guard. Yun Nuoxing said, "The tide of chaos behind us has replaced the weak spawns at the front. The offensive and defensive battles from now on will only become more and more difficult." And Yuan threw out orders after orders like a storm, commanding the army below. He did not have the time to pay attention to Yun Nuoxing's words. If he let his guard down even for a moment, the tide of chaos would probably hit the node barrier. Even if that was not the case, the tide of chaos would be completely pressed against the barrier after a while. "And Yuanshi, retreat," Yun Nuoxing suddenly said. And Yuanshi was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Manager Ping. He thought that he had already reached his limit, but he did not react so quickly. Furthermore, the damage rate of the barrier was not that high. It was only about 30 to 40%. But, no buts. Just call everyone back. Retreat behind the node barrier and continue the fight. The casualties this time are all those who have been fighting for too long and are lacking in spirit and stamina. They are not in good condition, so they can't fully utilize the newly gathered power. No matter how stubborn they are, they won't be able to achieve a better result. Retreat. Yun Nuoxing slowly took out the Netherruin's sword as he spoke. And Yuanshi hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Everyone, retreat to the node barrier." Little Monkey and the other demons at the front line heaved a sigh of relief. The tacit understanding they had developed over the past few days allowed them to retreat in an orderly manner. Some fought while retreating, some fought at the front line, and some supported from afar. "Retreat, retreat, retreat! Back to the barrier!" Little Monkey roared. He slapped away countless enemies with his left hand, and with his right hand, he flung his own people thousands of miles away into the node barrier. Just as he was about to use his old method to clear out all the enemies around him and retreat, a shadow suddenly shrouded the area around him. Little Monkey could not help but raise his head. He saw a huge black dragon falling from the sky. His red eyes narrowed. "Old dragon! Roar! Run! Run! Roar!" The dragons that had been circling in the sky all this time were nowhere to be seen. Little Monkey dealt with the enemies around him with a single slap. When he turned around, he saw the dragons falling from the sky into the node city. They were all struck down from the sky by some powerful force. "Mr. Tyrant, be careful in front." Little Monkey was shocked when he heard the little girl's voice. Layers of gray rock-like armor appeared on his body, and a layer of gray energy barrier hurriedly appeared. Then, he turned around and saw a huge energy beam that was hundreds of thousands of miles wide coming from the front, filling his entire vision. He only felt a flash of light in front of him, and the rock-like armor on his body cracked. The vast chaotic energy hit him directly, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood and fly backward. Before he flew backward, he hurriedly grabbed the old dragon that was falling down. The two of them flew backward for hundreds of miles, creating a huge trench on the ground before they finally stopped. Little Monkey raised his head and saw that in the depths of the chaotic tide, a towering giant was looking at them with his scarlet eyes. He was looking at the node city. This barrier, they already knew about the existence of this thing, and had always regarded it as the most powerful threat. They were also the ones who broke through the barrier, but they did not expect them to rush out and join the battle. They thought that by the time they faced them, they would have retreated to the 100-odd node barriers. "Roar! Run! What are you waiting for? Are you going to be a target?" The dragon's roar woke Little Monkey up. When he saw the giant raise his arm, he hurriedly carried the unconscious old dragon and was about to jump into the node city. However, before he could jump, a destructive feeling came from behind him. That feeling only came from him, and before the attack even hit him, he already felt that he was about to die. There were also sounds of panic on the city wall. Bang! The sound of violent energy colliding rang out less than 100 meters behind him. The terrifying impact made Little Monkey's hair stand on end. He turned around in fear and saw a huge energy barrier appear behind him. A figure with long fluttering hair was holding the barrier up to resist the shocking energy. No matter how much the chaotic energy was pushed, the barrier did not even ripple. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and go in." Yun Nuoxing looked back at them, and pointed at the node city with his chin. Only then did Little Monkey come to his senses. He hurriedly carried the old dragon and rushed into the node barrier. As soon as they landed, a group of people surrounded them to treat their injuries, and Yuan looked at Yun Nuoxing, who was standing outside the node barrier. For a moment, he did not understand what the military advisor was trying to do. At this moment, the chaotic energy of the spawn of chaos was coming at them from all directions. He was about to call out to Yun Nuoxing when he saw a layer of fluorescent light suddenly appear on Yun Nuoxing's body. Then, he slowly floated up. Buzz! Rings of energy light erupted from Yun Nuoxing's body like a wave of energy. Like snow-white shock waves, they surged out in all directions with him as the center. The layers of shock waves caused the chaotic energy that fell like raindrops to lose their momentum and fall to the ground. With a powerful energy shock wave, the sky suddenly exploded, turning into a black void. A wave of chaotic energy surged into this world without any resistance. Just the shock waves from the powerful energy had caused the chaotic spawns to explode out of thin air, scattering into balls of chaotic energy. This phenomenon spread for tens of thousands of miles in the tide of chaos before it lost its effect due to the extreme distance. However, everyone who saw this scene sucked in a breath of cold air and grimaced. This was the first time they had seen the military advisor use his full strength. Although they had expected him to be powerful, they had never imagined how powerful he would be. The Netherworld Ruined sword slowly appeared from thin air. Yun Nuoxing's hanging hand slowly touched the hilt of the sword. He slowly raised the Netherworld Ruined sword high and looked at the 10,000-mile-tall giant. Then, he casually swung the sword down. With a deafening sound of destruction, a 1,000,000-mile-wide dark red sword light burst out. It looked like an ocean had been overturned, as if a wall of water had risen from the ground. Then, it turned into a huge wave that swept forward. The wave expanded several times in the span of a few breaths. Along the way, it swallowed all the energy and chaotic spawn of chaos. In less than 0.001 seconds, everything was reduced to ashes. The giant raised its hand and punched out without thinking. Yun Nuoxing was stunned. Just when he thought that the giant had some special ability, the giant was swallowed by the dark red wave. It lasted less than half a second before it was destroyed. Yun Nuoxing could not help but facepalm. He thought that the giant was very powerful, so he used a powerful move. He did not expect it to be a rash one. It used its hand to touch the power that could destroy everything in the world, including the void and the void. He slowly walked forward, and with him as the center, the energy shock waves that burst out were stacked on top of each other. Every time an energy shock wave swept across the sky, countless chaos minions would be destroyed. However, this scene was very strange in the eyes of others. The area around him was like a death zone. No matter what entered it, it would only be crushed. He only needed to walk over and let his domain affect anything. The Nethervoid sword casually slashed out, and a cold light flashed past. Dozens of dark red destructive sword lights that were hundreds of thousands of meters long swept across the ground like plowing a field. Aside from those that were hit directly, the chaotic spawns that were nearby were also swept into the destructive wave and were annihilated. Those sword lights suddenly stopped when they reached the edge of the domain of death. They turned into light pillars that were only 1 meter thick and rushed out for a long distance before slowly coming to a stop. Yun Nuoxing strode forward. He was already thousands of miles away from the node's barrier. The chaotic tide also showed signs of weakness for the first time because of the approach of this murderous god. Even the dark shadow that covered the sky was dimming at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, it slowly retreated a distance. Streaks of sword aura charged towards the end of the line of sight with the power to annihilate an army. Rows of dark red pillars of light connected to form a wall of light in the line of sight. Yun Nuoxing let out a long sigh. He looked at the chaos spawns that had regrouped. Suddenly, he grabbed the Nethervoid sword and stabbed it into space. Rumble, heaven and earth rumbled. It sounded like the space and void were wailing from the sky. The row of red light walls suddenly became much brighter. Following the rumbling sound, a row of energy pillars formed a wall that crushed down from the sky onto the ground. It left a scar that spanned thousands of miles on the ground. Countless chaotic spawn. Speaking of which, those things couldn't be seen from the beginning. Everyone could only watch as their military advisor madly threw out a bunch of attacks. Everyone was stunned when they saw this. The magical beasts were drooling all over the ground. This was not a battle at all. This was a one-sided suppression and slaughter. He had forced the chaotic tide to retreat. This was unprecedented. This had never happened before in history. And then, it happened so casually in front of their eyes. And Yuan stared blankly at Yun Nuoshing pouring out all his power. He stared blankly at the blindfolded youth. I suddenly feel like Yun Nuoshing can defeat the chaotic tide alone. The blindfolded youth was dazed. He nodded, his legs weak. Chapter 1400. Boom! A huge fist print, thousands of miles long, carried the power to collapse the void, and rubbed out a gully that was tens of thousands of miles wide on the ground. After the huge fist passed by, a gust of wind from the fist could be seen flying across the chaotic battlefield, lifting groups and groups of chaotic creatures into the air. Qing Jun, like a humanoid dragon, rampaged through the chaotic tide, blasting those behemoths, which ranged from the size of an ordinary human to the size of thousands of miles tall, into the sky. The huge fist force turned those behemoths into hundreds of pieces that fell to the ground, and then turned into a small stream of chaotic energy that dissipated between heaven and earth. Can't kill them all. Can't kill them all. Qing Jun's eyes were covered by the light of energy, and a scorching breath came out of his mouth. He roared, and his hands tore to the left and right. The space in front of him, the sky, the earth, and everything on this path were occupied by a wide crack. No matter how I kill them, I can't kill them all. Lord Qing Jun, we are too deep. If we retreat from this position, we will be easily trapped. The Holy City warrior who followed Qing Jun looked at the humanoid dragon-like existence and couldn't help swallowing his saliva. He had been fighting with this big boss for many days. Every time he followed him into the chaotic tide, he felt frightened. He had tried to persuade him several times, but the way this big boss fought was too violent. He would always go deep into the enemy's army. But this big boss was really powerful. He had killed 77 times and had not suffered any injuries. Even the people who followed him had not been injured. Bang bang. Go back. Go back. Qing Jun nodded fiercely with a ferocious look on his face. With a punch, he sent a piece of land flying together with the space. Then, he grabbed Qing Jun in one hand and another person in the other. Before the Holy City warrior could react, he retreated toward the Node City with a loud bang, crushing the ground with one foot. The power of the explosion even killed thousands of chaos spawns. The Holy City warrior's face turned purple from being clamped by that powerful arm. He stared at the approaching city with wide eyes, thinking that it would be over in a dozen seconds. While he was holding it in, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a direction from the corner of his eye. He saw that a large part of the chaotic creatures had begun to move toward the east. Lord Qing Jun, look at those creatures. They had changed direction. Attention, everyone! The chaotic tide is changing. Countless people turned their eyes to the tide of chaos that was moving to the east, and they were all shocked. Qing Jun also turned his head and found that the forces they were facing had been reduced by nearly a third, and that part of them had all moved to the east. On the south side of the spirit-gathering continent, the same thing was happening on the right side of the continent. Everyone could see a large number of chaos minions moving toward the east, as if there was something there that they had to deal with immediately, I Ching was also in the midst of a bloody battle. Suddenly sensing this movement, he was startled. He suddenly stopped in the middle of this extremely dangerous battlefield. With a backhand slap, he sent the chaos spawn in front of him flying. His gaze followed the chaos spawns that were rapidly moving, and finally landed on the eastern side. He could not help but ponder. A gigantic chaos spawn in front of him suddenly bared its fangs and pounced over. Bang! I Ching kicked the snake into ashes. Looking at the eastern side, he could not help but frown. That's where Lord Feng is, right? What happened? After a moment, he shook his head. No matter what happened, it did not matter. Lord Feng and the others could handle it. If those chaos minions moved, they could still buy some time, allowing the 30th barrier to hold on for a while longer. He turned his head to look at the chaotic tide in front of him, his face pale. Ugh! I've killed until I'm vomiting. The war 1,000 years ago was also like today, and it went on for many years. Facing the even more dangerous abyssal death mist. Ugh, I don't want to recall memories like that. After leading a group of people to charge and kill for a while, I Ching decisively retreated a distance. Looking at the chaotic tide that was still moving, he frowned. Better report it. Lord Feng, a large number of chaos minions are moving toward you. Please be careful, I Ching said, massaging his temples. After waiting for about a minute, a response came from the other side. Oh, got it! Lord Feng, when will this be over? Suppressing my strength and fighting, I'm so tired I'm vomiting blood. It's over when it's over. Be patient. I'm so tired I want to die. How many days has it been since I've had a good rest? Yun Nuoxing could not help but sigh. It's fine. According to my calculations, if we endure, it'll be over in about 10 days. 10 days, it's 10 days. 10 days at least, 100 days at most. I Ching took a deep breath. He wanted to remove his suppression and directly recover his mid-tier strength to kill these guys. If he recovered his strength, even if he couldn't avoid the ending of being tired of killing, it would be a lot easier. Unfortunately, this was still someone else's territory. Those people from the distorted races seemed to have left, but who knew if there would be something left in the dark to watch this world? Once they were exposed, the consequences would be even worse. Thinking of this, I Ching rushed into the chaotic tide with a face full of immortal qi, and tore the tide apart violently with a strength that left people dumbfounded. Outside the eastern node city, Yun Nuo was floating in midair. Rings of destructive energy burst out from his body and spread out in all directions. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, no one would be able to survive. This domain was like a black hole. No matter what intruded, it would be annihilated in the blink of an eye. In just half a day, this place had already devoured countless chaos spawns. Yun Nuoxing raised the nethervoid sword and pointed it forward. The energy burst out from the tip of the sword like a dark red lightning net, covering millions of miles in front of him. The number of chaos spawns destroyed, he was too lazy to count. Every time the energy burst out, every time he raised the nethervoid sword, an endless number of chaos spawns would be annihilated, the chaotic tide. It was only now that he fully understood what a tide was. Using his strength to fight, it was like splitting a crack in the sea. The sea would split in two in a short time and then close up again. This was his current situation. No matter how he killed, no matter how many chaos spawns he annihilated, they would always regroup in less than 10 seconds, then swarm him and be annihilated again. He was like a small black hole standing in the middle of the ocean, swallowing seawater every second. Even though his capacity was limitless, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. It was just that he was a little impatient. Not to mention I Ching, who was tired to the point of vomiting. He was also tired to the point of vomiting from the killing. How many had he killed in the past few days? There should be at least 1 trillion of them. He had killed them all alone. But with the speed of their regeneration and the speed of their reinforcements, this was still considered a small number, right? Until now, he could not say for sure how many spawns of chaos were hidden in the abyss beneath this world. In short, there was no end to them, and they did whatever they wanted in this long battle. He realized one thing: the human wave tactic was actually a mental attack. Even if they could not kill him, they would still charge at him and disgust him. The node city behind him was already empty. Only the giant hourglass, CU, and the others were left behind to wait for him. The others had been chased to node city number 32. They were probably resting now. He would hold them off for as long as he could. After all, there was no energy here. He suddenly looked back at the rising sun. The golden sun hanging high in the sky was showing signs of dimming. Its light was flashing, which was a sign that its energy supply was running out. Tisk, it's still too much for it to supply energy to a reciprocity realm cultivator. It actually used up so much energy that it ran out of energy. Yun Nuoshing shook his head helplessly. A few seconds later, he cut off his connection with the rising sun and told Qing Jun, Yi Qing, and the others about this. It was not fun to use up the rising sun's energy for this. After all, they were not the only ones fighting in this world. There were many others drowning in the battlefield. Those people needed the energy from the rising sun more than they did. They could hold on for a long time with their own energy, or rather, they could hold on until the end of the war. After all, the capacity of a peak reciprocity realm cultivator was no joke. Boom! An even denser chaotic energy suddenly erupted in the distance. Yun Nuoshing turned his head and saw a scene that made his face twitch. It was the chaotic energy from two directions, all rushing toward him. Soon, he was surrounded from all directions. Ugh, the reinforcements that I Ching said were coming are finally here. Yun Nuoshing saw that there was no more light in the world. He could only see endless darkness. He could not help but sigh. He grabbed the Netherworld Ruin's sword and stabbed it into the space. The snow-colored shockwaves that constantly erupted from his body suddenly changed, turning into 7 huge elemental shockwaves. He continued to walk toward the depths of the chaotic energy, and the range of the shockwaves gradually increased. After persisting for about 2 days, Yun Nuoshing finally could not stand the boredom anymore. He slipped out of the chaotic energy and returned to the node city. When he saw that Cu and the other girls had regained their energy, he waved his hand and brought them to node city number 32. Realizing that they had lost their target, the chaotic tide began to madly charge towards the node barrier. The node barrier that had been abandoned a long time ago was shattered in less than an hour after Yun Nuoshing, I Ching, and the others all retreated. The Black Sea finally broke through the circle of node cities as it wished. It rushed past the hourglass-like buildings, and after its main force had penetrated to a certain extent, the destructive energy that had been brewing for several days finally let out a loud roar. As soon as the node barrier around node city number 30 disappeared, an even more obvious circle appeared on the ground. It was a circle formed by 8 straight lines. Every life in node city number 32 saw the powerful energy roar clearly. The sky was really bright, and Yuan and the others looked up at the golden sun in the sky. After crossing the barrier of node 30, they were considered to have stepped into the central circle. The huge figure of the rising sun became clearer in their vision. 2 days ago, when the rising sun dimmed for a moment, many people were shocked. However, when they saw it recover, they were relieved. If the rising sun was extinguished at this moment of life and death, then, without Yun Nuoshing saying anything, they all knew that the only remaining flame of hope would probably be annihilated in the darkness. Buddy, I have bad news for you. The blindfolded young man walked over and patted Yuan on the shoulder, and Yuan glanced at him and saw his worried look and frown. A bad thing that could happen at this time. Have we used up all the supplies? The blindfolded young man sighed and nodded. We've used up all the runes we've stored. Even with so many people, it's not easy to make those powerful rune energy towers. A small portion of the forces guarding the rear are already preparing for the rear line of defense. But we might not be able to increase our combat strength by the time we get there. Let's say that after we cross the barrier of the 32 nodes, the forces behind will only get weaker. The only thing we can rely on is the rising sun. And Yuan was silent for a moment. He turned to look at the node city, and saw that there were fewer energy towers and other things than before. He could not help but sigh. Then, he looked at Yun Nuoxing. The military counselor had held on for 2 days to buy critical time for the entire continent. Now, she looked a little tired. The blindfolded young man walked to the edge of the city wall and changed the topic. Logically speaking, the tide of chaos should have appeared by now. They have delayed for at least 2 hours. Could it be that they want to take a breather? Probably to slow down their march and recover their strength. The Cloud Lord's power had dealt them an unimaginable blow, and they need some time to recover. They are recovering much faster than us. If this continues, we would return to the situation a day or 2 ago. And Yuan smiled bitterly even as he spoke. If this continued, could they really wait until the day of the end? No one knew the answer to that question. None of the living beings on the main continent had ever seen such a large number of chaos spawns. A rough count showed that the number of chaos spawns they had destroyed was dozens of times more than all the chaos spawns they had encountered in the previous chaos tide. In the end, the number of chaos spawns they would have to face would be dozens of times more than that. It might even be equivalent to the sum of all the previous chaos tide. While everyone was waiting anxiously, a black shadow finally appeared on the horizon. This time, there was no need for anyone to shout. Everyone had already noticed it. The person who was sitting cross-legged on the ground slowly stood up and took out his long sword and long saber. He lowered his head and looked at his weapon. He took out a whetstone that had been used too much and cleaned the sword and long saber again. Although it was useless, it seemed that he would not be able to calm down if he did not do so. The energy tower that had been checked dozens of times and confirmed that there was no problem was checked again. The demonic beast that was lying on the ground slowly stood up and its body gradually grew bigger. The little monkey, the scale dragon, the elder dragon and the other demons returned to their familiar positions. The former looked at the tide of chaos that was still surging with a complicated gaze. Hai is dead, he said to the scale dragon beside him. The flood dragon was stunned. It raised its head and looked at the little monkey. It continued, "It seems it's been a while. I've asked around these 2 days. It seems that no one has seen it since the 25th node city." The scale dragon turned its head and remained silent for a while. "He always wanted to be buried in the golden lake in the holy city," it said softly. The little monkey sighed. Another old friend had gone on his way. They might have to go on their way too. It might be this time, or it might not be this time, but it might be the next time. Many people had already left before them, and they would follow. The resistance would only grow weaker in the future. They knew that even without an Yuan's reminder. It was something that everyone knew in their hearts. It was something that could not be helped, but also a predicament that they had to face. But what can we do? The blindfolded young man sighed. In the end, we still have to face this reality. If we don't want to die in the hands of those monsters, we can only stand up again and again. If we don't want to die for no reason, and if we don't want to disappear, then we can only stand up and fight. For ourselves, for others, for this world. And Yuan looked at the distance. The tide of chaos still needed some time to arrive. As expected, the tide of chaos had slowed down. They were probably taking the time to recover. Even though there was an endless army behind them, they were still accumulating their strength. They had nowhere to go. He turned around and took out a white stone with runes engraved on it. He placed it on the city wall and waved his hand to ignite a fire on the white stone. A wisp of purplish-green smoke slowly floated into the air. Everyone who saw this scene was stunned. Then, without hesitation, they half knelt down and lowered their heads. The demons also slowly crawled on the ground and closed their eyes. At this moment it was extremely peaceful. It was even more peaceful than the rest for the past few days. There was not even the sound of breathing. Siyu looked at this scene. She pulled Yun Nuoshing close and whispered into his ear, "What are they doing?" "I'm not sure." Yun Nuoshing shook his head. This seemed to be a ritual. There was no strange phenomenon. There was no energy fluctuation. He could not tell. It was probably some kind of custom in this world. It's probably mourning for the souls of the dead. Those who have died on the battlefield cannot even be collected. Some of them will not even exist in the memories of others. They have completely disappeared. Their souls, lives, and existence have all become the past. Yun Nuoshing flung his cloak and said softly, "We can only use this simple ritual to mourn for the souls of those who cannot be remembered. To be able to fight for our world in this dark and chaotic time, to fight for order, no matter how small the achievement is, it is worthy of everyone's respect. We have picked up the flag of the dead. In this chaotic battlefield, we have never compromised. We have never fallen. We will not pray for hope to come. We will not hope for a bright future. We will only clumsily raise the weapons in our hands and wave them 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, until we become dust and disappear from the world. As long as the chaos still exists, we will never stop." And Yuanqing slowly stood up and whispered. Who was he talking to? Perhaps he was talking to himself. Perhaps he was talking to everyone. Perhaps he was talking to the countless souls of the dead that were floating in the world. Now there was still a short moment of peace. This short moment allowed them to recall all the lives that had fallen on the road. Now it was still allowed. For the undying hope. The blindfolded young man also whispered in a low voice. When the wisp of flame dissipated, everyone and the demons stood up. They took a deep breath and looked at the tide of chaos in the distance that was about to reach their attack range. Their determined eyes were burning with golden flames. The tide of chaos is coming. It was no longer the familiar tone. It was not the familiar voice. After hearing this roar that contained endless will, all the lives let out a roar that made the sea of clouds churn. Their momentum was like a rainbow. The creation of heaven and earth. The end of chaos. The sharp sound of long swords piercing the city walls caused all the lives to turn their gazes. They looked at the military advisor and the battlefield in the distance. Suddenly, a huge beam of dark red destructive energy that was millions of miles wide descended from the sky. It was a majestic sight, as if the heavens had punished it. Wave after wave of destructive waves accompanied by the sound of laws exploding. That majestic sight made everyone's roars even louder. Hum! The sound of distorted energy resounded through the sky. After the dark red energy beam dissipated, several giants that were tens of thousands of kilometers in size appeared. They roared angrily along with the army, as if responding to their roars. Yun Nuoshing looked at the tide of chaos. She pulled out the Nethervoid sword and stood at the forefront of the city walls. She slowly raised the Nethervoid sword and pointed it forward. Until death. Roar! Wola! An earth-shattering roar was the response. The army poured out from the city walls like a tidal wave. Yun Nuoshing rushed to the front. She rushed in front of everyone. She looked at the chaos spawn that was about to come into direct contact with them. She raised the Nethervoid sword and slashed out once again. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.